In 1877 Wyoming, where dust claimed more lives than bullets, Mei Lin Zhao stood in her father's failing ranch house and learned her price. Enough water to save dying cattle, purchased with her future as wife to a man 40 years her senior. She had 3 weeks before the wedding that would seal her fate. The territory saw her as property, something yellow, foreign, expendable. But when a trail boss named Rhett Calloway arrived with 1,000 head of cattle and eyes that actually saw her, Mei Lin realized she had one chance to choose her own destiny. Like this video, comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels, and stay until the end to see if Mei Lin escapes the life others chose for her. The Wyoming sun had no mercy, and neither did men who counted water more precious than daughters. Mei Lin stood at the kitchen window of the Zhao ranch house, her hands submerged in dishwater that had been used 3 times already and would be used twice more before nightfall. Through the warped glass, she watched her father, back rigid, shoulders set, walk toward the well with Thomas Grissom, the land baron whose shadow fell across half the county like a vulture's wing. She knew what they were discussing. She'd known for weeks, ever since she'd overheard the conversation her father thought she was too obedient, too Chinese, too properly raised to understand. They were negotiating her. Mei Lin, her younger brother Jun's voice came soft from behind her. At 14, he already carried the weight of drought in his eyes. Father says you should prepare tea. For the guest. The guest? As if Thomas Grissom were someone to be honored rather than feared. How much water should I use? The question came out sharper than she intended. Jun flinched. They both understood the cruelty of the question. Every drop counted now. The creek that once ran clear through Zhao land had been reduced to a muddy trickle, then nothing at all. The well was dropping daily. Their cattle, what few remained, grew gaunt and hollow-eyed, their ribs showing through hide like the bars of a prison. Thomas Grissom owned the water rights to the northern creek, the one that still ran deep and cold even in August. He owned land, cattle, influence, and now, apparently, he wanted to own her too. Mei Lin dried her hands on her apron, removed it with careful precision, and smoothed down the dark blue dress she'd worn thin with washing. At 22, she'd already survived more than most women would in a lifetime. The journey from Guangdong province as a child, her mother's death from fever 2 years ago, the slow suffocation of being foreign in a place that would never fully accept her. But she'd never felt as trapped as she did now. The parlor was stifling despite the open windows. Her father, Chen Zhao, sat rigid in his chair, his queue hanging down his back and a thick braid going gray at the temples. Across from him, Thomas Grissom sprawled with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never been told no. Grissom was 56, thick through the middle, with pale eyes that cataloged everything like ledger entries. He owned the largest spread in the county, ran 3,000 head of cattle, and had buried 2 wives already. Mei Lin was intended to be the third. Ah, there she is. Grissom's voice rolled out like stones in a bucket. Pretty thing, Chen. You raised her well. Her father didn't meet her eyes. Mei Lin, tea for Mr. Grissom. She moved through the ritual with practiced grace, pouring from the pot she'd prepared with water she'd rationed from their cooking supply. The jasmine tea was a luxury they could no longer afford, saved only for occasions her father deemed important enough. Apparently selling his daughter qualified. Your father and I have been discussing arrangements, Grissom said, watching her over the rim of his cup. He tells me you're a hard worker, good with figures. That's useful in a wife. Mei Lin set the teapot down with careful control. I keep the ranch accounts. Not much of a ranch left to account for, though, is there? Grissom's smile didn't reach his eyes. That's what we're here to remedy. Her father finally spoke, his English still heavily accented after 20 years. Mr. Grissom has made generous offer. Water rights to Northern Creek, 50 head of breeding cattle, and cash payment, in exchange for marriage contract. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Mei Lin felt her pulse in her throat, her temples, her fingertips. Marriage contract. Don't play simple, girl. Grissom set his cup down with a decisive click. Your father's in debt up to his neck. No water, no cattle, no credit left at the bank. I'm offering him salvation, and you're the price. Fair trade, seems to me. Fair, she repeated, the word tasting like ash. You'll want for nothing, Grissom continued, warming to his pitch like a snake oil salesman. Big house, plenty of food, security, Better than withering away out here watching this place die slow. You're a smart girl, you can see that. She could see many things. She could see that her father wouldn't meet her gaze, that his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his own tea. She could see that Grissom looked at her the way he'd look at a promising heifer, evaluating bloodlines and breeding potential. She could see that she had 3 weeks. When? Her voice came out steady despite the chaos in her chest. First Saturday in September, her father said quietly. Reverend Mitchell will perform ceremony. 21 days, 504 hours. 30,240 minutes until she became Mrs. Thomas Grissom, third wife to a man who measured her worth in acre-feet of water. I see. Maylin folded her hands in front of her, the gesture her mother had taught her when emotions needed to be buried deep. If you'll excuse me, I have bread to finish. She walked from the room with her spine straight and her head high, but once she reached the kitchen, she gripped the edge of the wash basin hard enough to hurt. June stood in the doorway, his young face stricken. Maylin, don't. She held up one hand. Don't say it's not fair. Don't say father had no choice. Don't tell me it will be all right. But it won't be, June whispered. Everyone knows what happened to his other wives. The first one died in childbirth. The second one, they say she threw herself down the well. They say a lot of things. Maylin forced her hands to unclench, to return to the bread dough waiting on the counter. Most of it gossip. You don't believe that? No, she didn't. She'd seen Thomas Grissom's eyes, flat and cold as creek stones. She'd heard the stories whispered in town about locked rooms and bruises hidden under long sleeves, about a woman's scream cut short in the night. But what choice did she have? Her father had made his decision. In his world, daughters existed to serve family interests. Her preferences, her fears, her desire to choose her own path. These things were luxuries they could not afford. The drought had stolen their options along with their water. That evening, after Grissom had ridden off in his fancy buggy and her father had retreated to his study with a bottle of whiskey, Maylin stood in the yard and watched the sun bleed red across the horizon. The air smelled of dust and dying things. Miss Zhao? She turned to find Billy Tucker, one of their 2 remaining ranch hands, approaching with his hat in his hands. At 19, Billy was all bones and sunburn, loyal as a hound and about as useful with the few cattle they had left. Evening, Billy. Just wanted to say, he shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Heard about the arrangement with Mr. Grissom. I'm real sorry, miss. Thank you, Billy. If there's anything I can do, There isn't. The words came out harsher than she intended. I'm sorry. I appreciate the thought, but this is how things are. Billy nodded slowly, then pulled something from his pocket. Found this today, out by the southern fence line. Thought you might want it. He placed a small wildflower in her palm, its petals the color of sunset despite the drought. Somehow, it had survived where everything else had withered. Thank you, Billy. This time her voice was gentler. It's beautiful. After he left, she stood holding the flower, studying its delicate resilience. Then she pressed it carefully between the pages of her mother's old Bible. Not for faith, which had died with her mother, but for memory. 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks to reconcile herself to a future she hadn't chosen, to a man she didn't love, to a life that would slowly suffocate her, as surely as the drought suffocated the land. Unless. The thought came unbidden, dangerous, impossible. Unless she found another way. But what way? Where would she go? She had no money of her own, no family beyond these borders, no prospects in a territory that saw her as foreign and female, and therefore without power. She was trapped as surely as if Grissom had already locked the door. That night, Maylin lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle and creak around her. Sleep wouldn't come. Instead, her mind turned over possibilities like stones, searching for the one that might offer escape. By morning, she still had no answers. The next day brought more dust, more heat, more slow death of the land they'd worked so hard to tame. Maylin threw herself into work, mending fences, checking the remaining cattle, updating the accounts that showed their decline in merciless columns of red ink. She was in the barn, mucking out stalls, when she heard the sound of many hooves. A cattle drive. She could tell by the rhythm, the multiplicity of movement. They passed through sometimes, big herds heading north to railheads or better grazing. Usually they skirted private land, but the trail boss might stop to inquire about water or supplies. Maylin straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Through the barn's open doors, she could see dust rising in a cloud, and beneath it, the dark mass of cattle flowing like a river across the parched landscape. Then she saw the man. He sat his horse with easy confidence, separate from the main herd, clearly the one in charge. Even from a distance, she could see he was tall, broad-shouldered, his face shaded by a worn Stetson. He raised one hand in greeting toward the house, and her father emerged from the study, shading his eyes against the sun. Maylin moved closer, curious despite herself. "Afternoon," the man called, his voice carrying clearly. "Name's Rhett Calloway. I'm trail boss for this outfit, hoping we might water our herd at your creek, if you're willing. We'll pay fair." Her father's posture changed, became apologetic. "Creek is dry. Has been for 6 weeks." Calloway sat back in his saddle, surveying the land with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "That's hard luck. You got a well?" "Not enough for 1,000 head." "Understood." Calloway started to turn his horse, then paused, his gaze landing on Maylin where she stood half hidden in the barn's shadow. Their eyes met across the dusty yard, and something passed between them, recognition, maybe, though they'd never met. Or perhaps just the simple acknowledgement of one hard-working soul to another. "Ma'am," he said, touching his hat brim in a gesture of respect that felt genuine rather than automatic. Maylin found herself stepping forward out of the shadows. "How far to the next water?" "Maylin," her father said sharply, but Calloway answered as if her question was perfectly natural. "North Fork of the Powder River, about 15 miles. We'll make it before nightfall if we push." "Your cattle look thin." He smiled at that, a quick flash of white teeth in a sun-darkened face. "You know cattle, Miss?" "Zhao. Maylin Zhao." She moved fully into the sunlight now, ignoring her father's disapproving glare. "And yes, I know cattle. You've been on the trail too long. They need rest, water, good grazing." "Well, you're not wrong." Calloway's eyes were gray, she noticed, the color of storm clouds. "But we work with what we have, same as everybody else out here." Something in his tone, in the way he spoke to her rather than around her, made Maylin bold. If you're heading to Montana, you'll want to avoid the eastern route. Army's been moving Sioux off their land. Things are tense. Appreciate the information." He studied her more closely now, and she felt the weight of his attention like physical pressure. Not predatory, like Grissom's gaze, but curious, assessing. "You seem to know the territory pretty well." "I read the newspapers. I listen. People talk more freely around those they think aren't paying attention. And you pay attention. Always." Her father stepped between them, breaking the moment. "You need to move on. We cannot help you." "Understood, sir." Calloway touched his hat brim again, but his eyes stayed on Maylin for a heartbeat longer. Then he wheeled his horse and rode back toward his herd, shouting orders that set the cattle in motion once more. Maylin watched him go, that strange sensation of recognition still tingling along her spine. "Inside," her father commanded. "Now." She followed him into the house, where he rounded on her with rare anger. "You do not speak to strange men. You do not put yourself forward. This is not proper behavior for woman about to be married." "About to be sold," she corrected quietly. His hand came up fast, but he checked the blow at the last second, his palm trembling inches from her face. They stood frozen, both shocked by how close he'd come to striking her. "You think this is easy for me?" His voice cracked. "You think I want to give my daughter to that man? But we are drowning, Maylin. The debt, the drought. We have nothing left. Grissom's offer saves us, saves June, saves this land your mother loved. This is what family does. We sacrifice." "You sacrifice," Maylin said, her voice steady despite the tears burning behind her eyes. "You sacrifice me." She left him standing there and returned to the barn, to the honest work of mucking stalls and mending tack. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from the calendar counting down her freedom. But she couldn't stop thinking about the trail boss, about the way he'd spoken to her like an equal, about the easy strength in his shoulders and the intelligence in his storm-gray eyes, about the fact that he was heading north, to Montana, to country she'd only heard about in stories, to freedom. No, the thought was madness. She barely knew the man. She had no money, no provisions, no plan. Running away would destroy her father, ruin June's chances, condemn them all. But staying meant becoming Mrs. Thomas Grissom, meant locked doors and bruises, and eventually, perhaps, a lonely grave beside two other wives who'd learned too late that some cages had no keys. That night, Maylin sat at the kitchen table with the ranch account spread before her, pretending to work while her mind churned through impossible scenarios. June had long since gone to bed. Her father was in his study, drinking. The house creaked around her, familiar and suffocating. A sound outside made her look up. Hoofbeats, but just one horse, moving quietly. Then a soft knock at the door. She froze. No one visited after dark unless there was trouble. The knock came again, patient but insistent. Maylin stood, her heart hammering, and moved to the door. Through the window, she could see a tall figure silhouetted by moonlight, Rhett Calloway. She opened the door a crack. "Mr. Calloway, it's late." "I know, I apologize." He stood with his hat in his hands, and even in the dimness she could see the seriousness in his face. "I need to speak with you, alone, if possible. My father is likely passed out drunk by now, if the empty bottles I saw this afternoon are any indication." His voice was gentle but firm. "Miss Zhao, I'm not here to cause trouble, but I think there's something you need to hear." Every instinct told her to close the door, to send him away, to maintain the propriety her father demanded. But something stronger, desperation maybe, or hope, made her step onto the porch and close the door behind her. "Talk quickly," she said. "I asked around in town this afternoon after we watered the herd at the Powder." Calloway's eyes were serious in the moonlight. "About your situation. About Thomas Grissom." Heat flooded her cheeks. "It's none of your concern." "Maybe not, but I'm making it my concern anyway." He took a step closer, and she caught the scent of leather and sage and clean sweat. "His second wife didn't throw herself down that well, Miss Zhao. She was pushed, or beaten so badly she had no choice. The sheriff covered it up because Grissom owns half the county and most of the law." The words hit her like fists, confirming what she'd feared but hadn't wanted to believe. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know what you're walking into." His voice dropped lower. "And because I'm offering you an alternative, if you've got the courage to take it." "What alternative?" But even as she asked, she knew. Her pulse kicked up, hope and terror mixing in equal measure. "Marry me instead." The world seemed to stop. Maylin stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "I know how it sounds. We're strangers. But out here, marriages of convenience happen all the time. I need a bookkeeper, someone smart who can handle accounts and help run a cattle operation. You need a way out of a death sentence." He held up a hand before she could speak. "I'm not talking about a real marriage, just legal, on paper. Enough to void your father's contract with Grissom. You'd have your freedom, your own room, fair wages. And when we get to Montana and you're safe, if you want to go your own way, I'll give you references and enough money to start over." "You're insane." "Probably." A smile ghosted across his face. "But I'm also serious. I spent 3 hours in town listening to stories about Thomas Grissom, about what he does to women, about what he did to his wives. And I watched your face today, saw how you looked at your father when he was talking to me. I know what it looks like when someone's drowning, Miss Zhao. I grew up on a plantation in Virginia, watched my mother wither away in a pretty cage because she had no choices. I swore I'd never stand by and watch it happen again." Maylin gripped the porch railing, her knuckles white. "My father would never allow it." "Then don't ask permission. We leave before dawn. I've got the circuit judge in town. Man owes me a favor. He can marry us legal before sunrise, and by the time your father wakes up, you'll be Mrs. Rhett Calloway, not Mrs. Thomas Grissom." "You're asking me to run away." "I'm offering you a choice. Maybe the last one you'll get." She turned to face him fully, studying his features in the silver light. He was perhaps 30, weathered by sun and hard work, with a strong jaw and eyes that held steady on hers without wavering. There was no deceit in his face, but there was determination. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. My mother died when I was 15. My father worked her to death on that plantation, used her up until there was nothing left. She never had a choice either. Women didn't, not in that world. When she was dying, she made me promise something. She said, "If you ever have the power to give a woman her freedom, you do it. You don't think about the cost. You just do it." He looked out across the dark landscape. "I've got power now, Miss Zhao. Not much, but enough. And you need freedom. Seems simple to me." Tears stung Mei Lin's eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. "If I did this, and I'm not saying I will, but if I did, my father would be ruined. The deal with Grissom would fall through. He'd lose everything. He's losing everything anyway. Drought's not breaking. In 6 months, Grissom will own this land whether you marry him or not. At least this way, you won't be part of the collateral." The truth of it settled over her like dust. Her father was drowning in debt, grasping at any lifeline, even if it meant sacrificing his daughter. And when it failed, because it would fail, the drought was too severe, the debt too deep, he'd have sold her for nothing. "I need time to think." "You've got until 4 in the morning. That's when I'm leaving, with or without you. If you decide to come, pack light. Bring what matters, leave the rest. Meet me at the crossroads south of here." He settled his hat back on his head. "I won't try to convince you, Miss Zhao. This has to be your choice, freely made. But I'll tell you this, I've seen a lot of hard things in my life, and I've learned to recognize when someone's got fight left in them. You've got fight. Question is whether you're going to use it or let it die slow." He touched his hat brim one last time, then mounted his horse and rode off into the darkness, leaving Mei Lin alone on the porch with a decision that would change everything. She stood there long after his hoofbeats faded, her mind racing. 4 hours. She had 4 hours to choose between the cage she knew and the unknown freedom he offered, between being sold like cattle and taking a wild gamble on a stranger's promise, between dying slow as Mrs. Thomas Grissom or living on her own terms, whatever that might mean. Inside, the house was dark and still. Her father snored in his study. June slept the deep sleep of youth. They had no idea that the daughter and sister they thought they owned was standing on the edge of a cliff trying to decide whether to jump. Mei Lin went to her room and lit a candle with shaking hands. Then she pulled her mother's old carpet bag from under the bed and began to make choices. Her mother's jade bracelet, the photograph of her family in China, faces stern and formal, the pressed flower Billy had given her, her warmest dress, and her work clothes. The small amount of money she'd saved from selling eggs in town, $3.40. Her mother's Bible, not for faith, but for memory. The leather journal where she kept her private thoughts. She left behind her fancy dresses, her hair ornaments, all the pretty useless things meant to make her attractive to a husband. She wouldn't need them where she was going, if she was going. The candle burned lower. Outside, the night sounds continued. Crickets, the distant cry of a coyote, the wind moving through dry grass. Mei Lin sat on her bed with the carpet bag at her feet and stared at the door. She thought about her mother, dead at 40, from hard work and harder choices. She thought about June, who would survive whatever came because he was young and male, and the world would give him chances it would never give her. She thought about her father, who loved her in his way but loved his pride and his land more. She thought about Thomas Grissom's flat eyes and the well where his second wife had died. She thought about Rhett Calloway's steady gaze and the promise in his words. You'd have your freedom, freedom. When had she ever had that? She'd been a good daughter, a dutiful sister, a proper Chinese girl who kept her eyes down and her mouth shut. And where had it gotten her? Sold to the highest bidder, bartered for water rights like livestock. The anger came then, hot and clean. Anger at her father for his weakness, anger at Grissom for his predatory certainty, anger at a world that saw her as something to be traded rather than someone to be heard. But beneath the anger, something else stirred. Not hope exactly, but a possibility. Rhett Calloway had offered her a choice, not rescue. He'd been clear about that. He didn't want a helpless bride to save. He wanted a partner, a bookkeeper, someone capable. He'd spoken to her like an equal, looked at her like a person. And he was offering her the one thing she'd never had, the power to choose her own path. The candle guttered. Mei Lin stood, decision crystallizing like ice. She would go. She changed into her sturdiest dress, laced her work boots, and pinned her hair tight beneath a plain bonnet. She wrote 2 letters by candlelight, one to her father, one to June. Then she picked up her carpet bag and walked through the dark house like a ghost leaving its haunting. In the kitchen, she paused. This room held so many memories, her mother teaching her to make dumplings, June practicing his English while she cooked, her father laughing before the drought killed his joy. She would miss these walls, these worn floorboards, the familiar weight of home. But home had become a prison, and she'd learned that some doors only open from the inside. Maylin set her letters on the table where they'd be found, took one last look, and walked out into the night. The crossroads waited a mile south, marked by a weathered signpost that pointed toward town in one direction, open territory in the other. Maylin walked through darkness, her carpet bag growing heavier with each step, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was madness. She was running away with a stranger, abandoning her family, breaking every rule she'd ever been taught about duty and honor and obedience. But staying meant death, slow or fast, and she'd discovered she wasn't ready to die. She reached the crossroads as the eastern sky began to lighten, turning from black to deep blue. For a long moment, she stood alone in the pre-dawn silence, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. Then she heard hoofbeats. Rhett Calloway emerged from the shadows astride his horse, leading a second mount, a sturdy mare with kind eyes. He pulled up beside her, and even in the dim light she could see the question in his face. "I'm here," she said simply. Something that might have been relief crossed his features. "You're sure?" "No." She met his eyes squarely. "But I'm here anyway." He swung down from his horse and took her carpet bag, securing it behind the mare's saddle. Then he offered his hand to help her mount. His grip was strong, calloused, steady. "Judge Wilson's waiting," he said. "We've got about an hour before your father wakes up and all hell breaks loose." Maylin settled into the saddle, gathering the reins. Her whole life was in that little bag and in the choice she'd just made. Everything else? The ranch? Her father's plans? Thomas Grissom's expectations. She was leaving behind like dust. "Then we'd better not waste time," she said. Rhett Calloway smiled, and she saw in that smile something she'd never expected to see in a man's face when he looked at her. Respect. "No, ma'am," he said. "We'd better not." They rode toward town through the gathering dawn, 2 strangers about to become husband and wife, leaving behind one life and riding hard toward another. Behind them, the Wyoming sun rose bloody and fierce over a dying ranch, and a father who would wake to find his daughter gone and his carefully laid plans in ruins. Ahead, the territory opened wide and wild, full of promise and danger in equal measure. And between them, unspoken but growing stronger with each mile, was the understanding that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was choose. Maylin had chosen. Now she would see where that choice led. The judge's office smelled of old leather and older whiskey. Judge Terrence Wilson sat behind a desk piled with legal documents, his spectacles perched low on his nose, his expression suggesting he'd seen stranger things than a trail boss marrying a Chinese woman at dawn, but not many. "You're certain about this, miss?" His voice was gravelly but not unkind. "Marriage is a serious contract. Can't be undone easy." Maylin stood beside Rhett in the cramped office, her carpet bag at her feet, her hands clasped to keep them from trembling. Through the window, she could see the sky lightening to pearl gray. Somewhere out there, her father still slept, unaware that his daughter was about to make herself legally unavailable for the bargain he'd struck. "I'm certain," she said. Wilson looked at Rhett. "And you, Calloway? You understand you're taking on responsibility for this woman. Any debt she carries, any trouble that follows her, it becomes yours." "I understand. There's also the matter of, well," Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "Folks around here aren't always kindly disposed toward mixed marriages, Chinese and white. You'll face talk, maybe worse than talk." "We'll manage," Rhett said quietly. Wilson sighed and reached for a leather-bound book. "All right then. Let's make this legal before the sun comes up and Thomas Grissom finds out he's lost his bride." The ceremony was brief, almost businesslike. Wilson read from the book in a monotone voice, asking questions that required simple answers. Mei Lin heard herself responding as if from a great distance, her voice steady even as her world tilted on its axis. "Do you, Mei Lin Zhao, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Do you, Rhett James Calloway, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you man and wife. Sign here." Mei Lin's hand shook only slightly as she wrote her name, her old name, for the last time. Below it, she added her new signature, Mei Lin Calloway. The letters looked foreign, impossible, like a word from a language she didn't speak, but they were legal. They were real, and they meant Thomas Grissom had no claim on her anymore. Rhett paid the judge with cash from his vest pocket, then guided Mei Lin outside with a hand at her elbow. The touch was respectful, impersonal, nothing like the possessive grip she'd felt from Grissom during his visits. "We need to move fast," Rhett said, helping her mount the mare. "Your father will find those letters soon, and when he does, he'll come looking," Mei Lin finished. She gathered the reins, feeling the horse shift beneath her. "With Grissom, probably. And maybe the sheriff. Can they annul it? The marriage?" She thought about that, about the laws she'd read in her father's legal books during long winter evenings. Not if it's been consummated, but since we're not, she felt heat rise in her cheeks. They might try to claim coercion or fraud. Rhett swung into his own saddle with easy grace. "Then we'd better put as many miles between us and them as possible. The herd's camped 10 miles north. We can reach them by full daylight." They rode through town as it began to wake. Storekeepers opening shops, a dog barking at nothing, the smell of bread baking somewhere nearby. Normal morning sounds in a normal place, except nothing about this morning was normal for Mei Lin. She was married, she was running away. She'd chosen freedom over duty, and the weight of that choice sat heavy in her chest. "You all right?" Rhett asked as they cleared the last buildings and hit open country. "Ask me in a week." He smiled at that, a quick flash in the growing light. "Fair enough." They rode hard for the first hour, the horses' hooves drumming against packed earth, distance accumulating between Mei Lin and everything she'd ever known. The sun climbed higher, turning the sky from pearl to gold to hard blue. The temperature rose with it. When they finally slowed to rest the horses, Rhett offered her a canteen. Mei Lin drank gratefully, tasting metal and minerals and the faint flavor of the leather it was stored in. "Tell me about your operation," she said, handing back the canteen. "If I'm to keep your books, I should know what I'm managing." Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. "Straight to business. I like that." He took a drink himself, then corked the canteen. "I've got 1,000 head, mixed breeds, but mostly longhorns. Bought them cheap in Texas, planning to sell high in Montana. The railroad's pushing through up there, and they'll pay premium for beef to feed the workers." "How many men in your crew?" 12, including me. Good men, mostly. A few rough around the edges, but they know cattle, and they know the trail." "And they'll accept taking orders from a woman?" Rhett's gaze was direct. "They'll accept you keeping the books because you're smarter than them, it figures. Whether they accept you beyond that will depend on how you carry yourself." He paused. "I won't lie to you, Mrs. Calloway. Some of them won't like it. You're Chinese, you're female, and you're now the boss's wife. That's 3 strikes in some men's eyes." "I've had 3 strikes my whole life," Mei Lin said. "I'm still here." "Yes, you are." He looked at her with something that might have been respect. "The key is making yourself useful, not just tolerated, but needed. Show them you can do things they can't, and they'll come around. Most of them, anyway." They rode on. Around mid-morning, Mei Lin caught the first scent of cattle on the wind, a thick, earthy smell of manure and hide and animal sweat. Then she heard them, the low rumble of 1,000 voices complaining about the heat, the trail, the dust. The herd came into view gradually, a dark mass spread across a shallow valley with decent grass and a creek running through it. Men moved among the cattle with practiced efficiency, and on the far side she could see the chuck wagon and the remuda, the spare horses kept for rotation. Every eye turned toward them as they rode in. Mei Lin felt the weight of their stares, measuring and assessing. She kept her spine straight and her chin up, meeting their gazes without flinching. This was her first test, she knew. How she presented herself now would set the tone for everything that followed. Rhett dismounted near the chuck wagon, where a grizzled man with a salt and pepper beard was stirring something that smelled vaguely edible in a large pot. "Cookie, this is May Lynn Calloway, my wife." The silence that followed was profound. Cookie's spoon stopped mid-stir. Behind him, several cowboys froze in whatever they'd been doing. "Your wife," Cookie repeated slowly. "As of when?" "As of dawn this morning." Rhett helped May Lynn down from her horse. "She'll be managing the accounts and helping with the operation. I expect everyone to treat her with respect." A young cowboy, barely 20 with a shock of red hair, spoke up from where he was checking a saddle. "Boss, I don't mean no disrespect, but bringing a woman on a cattle drive, that's bad luck. Everyone knows it." "What everyone knows," Rhett said mildly, "is usually half superstition and half horseshit. Mrs. Calloway is here, she's capable, and she's staying. Anyone got a problem with that, they can collect their pay and ride out now." No one moved, but May Lynn could read the doubt in their faces, the skepticism, the resentment. She'd seen those expressions before. Different faces, same message. She didn't belong here. She was a disruption, a problem. "I can cook," she said into the silence. All eyes swung to her. "I can mend clothes, treat injuries, and I'm better at arithmetic than anyone here, except possibly Mr. Calloway. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'll earn my place like everyone else." Cookie looked her up and down, then grunted. "You know how to make biscuits?" "Yes." "Good biscuits? Not the kind that could break a tooth?" "My mother taught me to cook when I was 6. My biscuits won't break teeth." "We'll see about that." But there was less hostility in his voice now. Cookie was practical above all else, and if she could cook, that made her useful rather than just problematic. A tall cowboy with a weather-beaten face and intelligent eyes approached, extending his hand. "Name's Marcus Webb. I'm the segundo, second in command. Welcome to the outfit, Mrs. Calloway." May Lynn shook his hand firmly. His grip was testing her, she knew, seeing if she'd flinch from calloused strength. She didn't. "Thank you, Mr. Webb." Just Webb is fine. We don't stand much on formality out here." He glanced at Rhett. "Boss, we've got a situation. Found tracks this morning, heading northeast. Unshod ponies, maybe 6 or 7. Could be nothing, could be Sue looking at our herd." Rhett's expression tightened. "How old are the tracks?" "Fresh. Last night, probably." "Double the night watch, and keep the herd tight." He looked at May Lynn. "I need to see to this. Cookie, can you help Mrs. Calloway get settled?" "I suppose." Cookie jerked his head toward the chuck wagon. "Come on, then. I'll show you where things are." May Lynn followed him, aware that she was being watched by every man in camp. Cookie led her to the back of the wagon, where supplies were stored in careful order. "This here's the food stores," he explained, his tone gruff but not unkind. "Beans, flour, salt pork, coffee. We're running low on some items. I've got a list. You say you can do figures?" "Yes." "Then you can help me sort out our supplies, figure what we need to stretch until we reach the next town." He pulled out a battered ledger. "Boss usually handles this, but he's got enough on his mind managing 12 cowboys and 1,000 stubborn cattle." May Lynn took the ledger and flipped through it. The entries were basic, amounts and dates, but no proper accounting of costs versus budget, no projection of future needs. She could see immediately where improvements could be made. "I can organize this better," she said. "Create a proper system." Cookie snorted. "You do that and I'll forgive you for being a woman on a cattle drive. Maybe even forgive you for being the boss's sudden wife, which is still peculiar, if you ask me." "I didn't ask," May Lynn said mildly. He laughed at that, a rusty sound like a hinge that needed oil. "All right, you got spine. That's something." He handed her a tin cup. "Coffee?" "Please." They sat in the shade of the chuck wagon, and May Lynn drank the bitter, overboiled coffee while Cookie explained the rhythm of the trail. Up before dawn, breakfast quick and hot, then the herd would move north at a steady pace, covering 10 to 15 miles a day. The cowboys worked in shifts, rotating positions, some riding point at the front, others on swing along the sides, still others at drag in the rear where the dust was worst. "It's hard, dirty work," Cookie said. "And that's on good days, bad days. You got storms, stampedes, rivers to cross. rustlers looking to steal cattle, and Indians who might decide we're on their land without permission. He squinted at her. You sure you want to be here? Trail's no place for a delicate lady. I'm not delicate, Maylin said. And I'm already here. I'll manage. Throughout the day, she worked steadily, organizing supplies, updating the ledger with proper categories and calculations, helping Cookie prepare the noon meal. The cowboys watched her with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity, but no one openly challenged her presence. As the sun began its descent, Rhett returned from checking the perimeter. He found her sitting cross-legged near the wagon, the ledger open on her lap, her brush moving efficiently across the page as she recorded entries in neat columns. How's it going? He asked. Your accounting system was chaos, she said without looking up, but I'm fixing it. He smiled. I'm sure you are. He crouched beside her, examining her work. This is good, clear, professional. I told you I could do this. Yes, you did. He was quiet for a moment. The men are talking. About you, about the sudden marriage. Some of them are concerned it'll cause trouble. Let them talk. Maylin closed the ledger. I'll prove my worth through work, not words. That's wise. He stood, offering her a hand up. Come on, I want to show you something. She let him pull her to her feet, and they walked to the edge of camp where the herd was settling for the night. The cattle spread across the valley like a living carpet, their coats catching the golden light of late afternoon. 1,000 head, Rhett said quietly, bought with every dollar I had and a lot I borrowed. This drive succeeds. I can start my own ranch in Montana. It fails. He didn't finish the sentence. It won't fail, Maylin said. You sound certain. I've learned to be certain when I have to be. She watched the cattle, their slow movements, their constant low voices. In my world, doubt gets you married off to men like Thomas Grissom. Certainty gets you here. Fair point. He glanced at her. You should know, I sent one of the men back to town earlier, to listen for news. Your father will have found the letters by now. The reminder sent a chill through her despite the warm evening. And? We'll know soon enough what kind of pursuit we're facing. They stood in silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and red. Then Rhett said, I meant what I told the judge. Any trouble that follows you becomes my trouble too. You're not alone in this. Something loosened in Maylin's chest, a knot she hadn't realized was there. Thank you. That night, she slept under the stars for the first time in her life, wrapped in a bedroll near the chuck wagon while the night watch circled the herd singing low, mournful songs to keep the cattle calm. The ground was hard, the air was cold, and she'd never felt more alive. Morning came with Cookie's shout and the smell of coffee boiling over an open fire. Maylin rose stiff and sore, but she didn't complain. She helped prepare breakfast, biscuits, beans, salt pork, working efficiently while the men ate in shifts. The red-haired cowboy approached her as she was cleaning up, his hat in his hands. Ma'am, name's Wyatt. I wanted to apologize for what I said yesterday, about women and bad luck. Apology accepted, Maylin said, scrubbing a pot with sand and water. It's just, well, you can cook better than Cookie. Don't tell him I said that. She smiled despite herself. Your secret's safe. By mid-morning, the herd was on the move again, a slow-flowing river of cattle with cowboys riding alongside, keeping the stragglers in line. Maylin rode near the chuck wagon, which Cookie drove with practiced skill despite the rough terrain. That's when the rider appeared on the horizon behind them. Webb spotted him first, his sharp eyes catching the distant figure. Boss, we got company. Rhett wheeled his horse, shading his eyes against the sun. The rider was still too far to identify, but he was coming fast, pushing his horse hard. Could be the man I sent to town, Rhett said, or could be trouble. As the rider drew closer, Maylin recognized him, Billy Tucker, her father's ranch hand, his young face flushed with exertion. That's Billy, she said, her stomach tightening. From my father's ranch. Rhett positioned his horse between Maylin and the approaching rider, one hand resting casually on the rifle strapped to his saddle. But when Billy pulled up, gasping, his hands were empty and his expression was frantic. Miss Mrs. Calloway. He struggled for breath. I had to warn you. Your father, he's coming, with Grissom, and the sheriff. How far behind you? Rhett asked. Maybe 3 hours. They were organizing a posse when I left. Grissom's saying you kidnapped Mrs. Calloway, that the marriage ain't legal because you coerced her. Billy looked at Mei Lin desperately. I tried to tell them it wasn't like that, but nobody listens to a ranch hand. Mei Lin felt ice settle in her stomach. She'd known pursuit would come, but hearing it confirmed, knowing they were only hours away, made it terrifyingly real. How many men? Rhett's voice was calm, calculating. 8, maybe 10, plus the sheriff. And Grissom's got lawyers, Miss Ma'am. They're saying they can annul the marriage, claim you weren't of sound mind. I was perfectly sound, Mei Lin said sharply. I chose this. I know that, ma'am, but Grissom, he's got influence. And your father, Billy's voice dropped. Your father's real angry. I ain't never seen him like that. Rhett turned to Webb. How far to the county line? 20 miles, maybe 25. But they can cross it same as us. Won't stop a posse if they're determined. No, but it'll put us in different jurisdiction. Make things more complicated for them legally. Rhett's mind was working fast. We need to move the herd faster. Can we push to 15 miles today? We can try, but we'll run weight off the cattle. Might lose some of the weaker ones. Better than losing everything if they catch us and claim I'm a kidnapper. Rhett looked at Mei Lin. You ready for a hard ride? I'm ready. Billy, Rhett said. You ride with us or go back? Billy straightened in his saddle. I ride with you, sir. I didn't like what Mr. Zhao was doing, selling his daughter like that. It ain't right. Welcome to the outfit then. Webb, let's get this herd moving. Double time. The next hours were a blur of dust, noise, and constant motion. The cowboys pushed the cattle harder than was good for them. Voices shouting, whips cracking, horses dancing nervously as the herd picked up speed. Mei Lin rode alongside the chuck wagon, which Cookie drove with grim determination, the supplies rattling and banging with every rut. They stopped only once, briefly, to rest the horses and let the cattle drink from a muddy stream. Mei Lin used the time to help Cookie redistribute weight in the wagon, making it more balanced for the rough pace. You're holding up better than I expected, Cookie admitted grudgingly. I'm tougher than I look. Yeah, I'm starting to see that. As afternoon bled toward evening, Webb rode up to Rhett with news. Got riders coming up fast from the south. Looks like our company's arrived early. Mei Lin's heart lurched. She turned in her saddle and saw them, a group of men silhouetted against the declining sun, riding hard. Even from this distance, she could make out her father's rigid posture and Grissom's bulky frame. How far to the county line, Whit? Rhett asked. Maybe 5 miles, but they'll catch us before we make it. Then we stop and face them. Rhett's voice was firm. On our terms, not theirs. Webb, circle the herd here. Tight formation. Cookie, get the wagon in the middle. Boss, if this turns to shooting, it won't, Rhett said, but we're not running anymore. We stand our ground. The cowboys moved quickly, efficiently, bringing the herd to a halt and forming a defensive circle with the chuck wagon and horses at the center. Mei Lin dismounted, her legs shaking slightly from the long ride, and stood beside the wagon while the posse approached. Her father was in front, his face dark with fury. Beside him, Thomas Grissom sat his horse like a man who owned everything he surveyed. The sheriff, a heavy man named Dalton, who owed Grissom favors, rode on the other side. Behind them, 8 more men, all armed. They pulled up 20 yards away, and for a long moment, the two groups faced each other across dusty ground while the cattle shifted and lowed. Mei Lin, her father's voice cracked like a whip. You come here, now. She didn't move. Mr. Zhao, Rhett said calmly, your daughter is now my wife, legally married as of yesterday morning by Judge Wilson in town. She's under my protection, and she stays here. That marriage is a fraud. Grissom's voice was thick with rage. You coerced her, kidnapped her in the night. We have witnesses who will testify she was taken against her will. You have liars who will say what you pay them to say, Mei Lin said, her voice carrying clearly across the distance. Every head turned toward her. I wasn't kidnapped. I wasn't coerced. I made a choice. You are my daughter. Her father's English deteriorated in his anger, mixing with Cantonese. You have no right to choose. I am your father. Your duty is to obey. My duty was to let you sell me to that man? Mei Lin pointed at Grissom. To become his third wife? To die like the others died? How dare you Grissom started. How dare you? Maylin interrupted, and her voice rang out strong and clear. Everyone knows what happened to your wives. Everyone knows you beat them, broke them, killed them. My father was willing to trade me to you for water rights like I was livestock. Well, I refused the trade. The sheriff cleared his throat uncomfortably. Ma'am, if you were coerced? I was coerced, Maylin said, by my father and by Mr. Grissom when they decided my future without my consent. Mr. Calloway offered me a choice. I took it. That's not kidnapping. That's freedom. The law says a father has rights over his unmarried daughter, Grissom said coldly. And the law says a married woman answers to her husband, not her father, Rhett countered. She's married now, legal and binding. Judge Wilson has the papers. You want to challenge it? Take it to court, but you can't take her. The sheriff shifted in his saddle. Mr. Grissom, if the marriage is legal, it's not legal if she was coerced. She says she wasn't. The sheriff was clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. And Judge Wilson, he's a fair man, wouldn't perform a marriage under duress. She's lying. She's been corrupted by this trail trash. Watch your mouth, Webb said quietly, and suddenly all 12 of Rhett's cowboys were standing, hands near their weapons, eyes hard. The tension ratcheted up like a rope being twisted tighter and tighter. Maylin could feel violence hovering in the air, waiting for the smallest spark. Father, she said, and her voice was softer now but no less firm. Please, I'm not asking you to approve. I'm asking you to let me go. Chen Zhao stared at her across the distance, his face working with emotions she couldn't read. Anger? Yes. But also something else. Pain, maybe. Or the beginning of understanding. You bring shame on our family, he said finally, but his voice had lost its sharp edge. I bring life to myself, Maylin replied. That's not shame, that's survival. For a long moment, father and daughter looked at each other. Then Chen Zhao turned his horse away. We go, he said to the others. This is finished. The hell it is, Grissom exploded. I paid good money for that girl. I've got a contract. Contract was with me, Chen Zhao said wearily. She is my daughter no longer. She make her choice. I have no daughter now. The words should have hurt. Instead, Maylin felt a strange kind of relief. Her father had released her, even if he'd done it by disowning her. But Grissom wasn't finished. Sheriff, I'm filing charges. Kidnapping, theft, fraud. You arrest this man now, or I'll have your badge. Sheriff Dalton looked between Grissom and Rhett, clearly calculating politics and practicality. Mr. Grissom, I can't arrest a man for marrying a woman who says she went willingly. Judge Wilson won't support it, and neither will most folks once they hear the story. You push this, you might not like what comes out. What comes out? Grissom's face was flushed dark red. What are you implying? I'm implying, the sheriff said carefully, that there's been talk about your previous wives. Talk you've kept quiet with money and influence. But if this goes to court, that talk might become testimony. You want that? The threat hung in the air. Grissom's face went from red to white to red again. His hands clenched on his reins hard enough that his horse shifted nervously. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and venomous. He fixed Maylin with a look of pure hatred. You think you're free? You're nothing, a Chinese whore who ran off with a trail boss. Everyone will know what you are. Everyone will know I chose dignity over death, Maylin said. I can live with that. Grissom yanked his horse around and spurred it viciously, riding off toward town. Her father followed more slowly, not looking back. The sheriff lingered a moment longer. Ma'am, he said to Maylin, for what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. That man's got a darkness in him. He touched his hat brim. Calloway, you'd best move your herd out of this county quick. Grissom's got a long memory and deep pockets. He might try something else. Oblige for the warning, Sheriff. The posse rode away, and slowly the tension drained from the camp. Maylin found she was trembling, adrenaline flooding out of her system all at once. Her knees went weak. Rhett was beside her instantly, one hand steadying her elbow. Easy. You did good. Better than good. I just disowned my own father. He disowned you first, and from what you've told me, he sold you long before that. His voice was gentle. You stood up for yourself. That took courage. Around them, the cowboys were relaxing, putting away weapons, returning to the herd. But they looked at Maylin differently now. She'd faced down her father, a land baron, and a sheriff's posse without flinching. She'd earned something in their eyes. Respect. That night they pushed on until full dark before making camp. The herd was exhausted, the men were exhausted, but they'd crossed the county line and put distance between themselves and Grissom's reach. Cookie made a simple meal of beans and hardtack, but nobody complained. They ate in tired silence. Then one by one, the men approached Maylin. Wyatt was first. "Ma'am, that was something today. The way you stood up to them." "Thank you, Wyatt." Webb came next. "You've got steel in you, Mrs. Calloway. I respect that." Even the quieter cowboys, the ones who'd been most skeptical, nodded to her as they passed, acknowledging her presence as something more than just the boss's inconvenient wife. Later, as the stars came out and the night watch began their rounds, Rhett found her sitting near the fire, the ledger in her lap, though she wasn't really seeing the numbers. "You all right?" he asked. "My father said he has no daughter now." "That hurts." "Yes." She closed the ledger. "But it also frees me. He can't come after me again. He's washed his hands of me." "And Grissom?" "He'll try something. Men like him don't accept defeat." She looked up at Rhett. "I'm sorry I brought this trouble to you." "You brought yourself to me. The trouble was already there. I just helped you escape it." He sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cooling night air. "You were brave today, not just facing them, but choosing this life in the first place. That takes strength. Or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing." He was quiet for a moment. "We'll reach Montana in about 6 weeks if the weather holds and we don't hit major trouble. When we get there, like I promised, if you want to go your own way, I'll help you. Give you references, money to start over. The marriage can be annulled quiet-like if that's what you want." Maylin considered that. 6 weeks ago, freedom had meant escape from Thomas Grissom. Now sitting under stars in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by 1,000 cattle and 12 cowboys who were starting to accept her, freedom meant something different. It meant choice. Real choice. "Ask me again in Montana," she said. Rhett smiled. "Fair enough." He stood and headed toward his own bedroll, but paused. "Maylin, you're going to do fine out here. Better than fine. You're going to thrive." After he left, she sat alone with the ledger and the stars and the low song of the night watch drifting across the herd. The ground was hard beneath her, the future uncertain ahead of her, and the past burned to ash behind her. But for the first time in her life, Maylin Calloway felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The days rolled into each other like the land itself, endless, demanding, raw. Maylin learned the rhythm of the trail the way she'd once learned embroidery, through repetition and pain and gradual mastery. She woke before dawn with the rest of the camp, helped Cookie prepare meals that fueled hard labor, kept the accounts with meticulous precision, and slowly, grudgingly, earned her place among men who'd initially seen her as nothing more than bad luck in a calico dress. By the end of the first week, her hands were blistered and her muscles ached in places she hadn't known could hurt. But she didn't complain, and the men noticed. "She's tougher than she looks," she overheard Webb telling Rhett one evening. "Wyatt said she helped him pull a calf out of a mud bog yesterday. Didn't even flinch when she got covered in muck." "She's had to be tough," Rhett replied quietly. "World doesn't give women like her much choice." But Maylin pretended not to hear, but the words warmed something in her chest. She was being seen, not as Chinese or female or problematic, but as capable, as necessary. The second week brought rain, cold and relentless, turning the trail to mud and the cattle to miserable, complaining beasts that wanted nothing more than to turn around and go home. The men worked in sodden clothes, tempers short, exhaustion written in every line of their faces. That's when Maylin proved her worth in ways that had nothing to do with cooking or accounting. One of the younger cowboys, a boy named Danny, who couldn't have been more than 17, came down with fever. His skin burned hot to the touch, and he shivered violently despite the blankets Cookie piled on him. "Could be influenza," Cookie said grimly. "Or worse, if it spreads through the camp, it won't," Maylin said. She'd nursed her mother through fevers, had learned which herbs could break a temperature and which could ease pain. "I need willow bark if you have it, and clean water as much as you can boil." She worked through the night, bathing Danny's fever, forcing tea down his throat, monitoring his breathing. Rhett checked on them periodically, his face tight with worry. "If he dies," he started. "He won't." Maylin wrung out a cloth in cool water and placed it on Danny's forehead. "The fever's breaking. He'll be weak for a few days, but he'll live." "How do you know?" "Because I won't let him die." She looked up at Rhett, her eyes burning with exhaustion. "I've seen enough death. I'm not adding this boy to the count." By morning, Danny's fever had indeed broken. He woke weak but lucid, his eyes finding Maylin where she sat slumped against the wagon wheel, asleep from sheer exhaustion. "Ma'am?" His voice was a croak. Did you stay with me all night?" "Someone had to." Maylin straightened, wincing as her spine protested. "How do you feel?" "Like I got trampled by the whole herd, but alive." He managed a weak smile. "Thank you, ma'am. Cookie said I might not make it." "Cookie worries too much." She stood, her legs stiff. "Rest today. Tomorrow you can help with light work. And drink water, as much as you can stand." Word of what she'd done spread through the camp faster than wildfire. That evening, when she sat down to her own meal, she found the men had saved her the best portions, the meat with less gristle, the coffee that wasn't half grounds. Small gestures, but they spoke volumes. "You saved Danny's life," Wyatt said, sitting down across from her. "That means something out here. I just did what needed doing. That's exactly why it means something." He tipped his hat to her and walked away, leaving Maylin alone with the realization that she'd crossed some invisible threshold. She wasn't just tolerated anymore. She was one of them. The third week brought different trouble. They were crossing through territory that had once been promised to the Sioux, then taken back, then promised again, then taken back again. The land itself bore scars of broken treaties, abandoned villages, burned teepees, the bones of buffalo killed not for food, but to starve a people into submission. Maylin understood that kind of violence. She'd seen it in smaller ways in Wyoming, the casual cruelty directed at anyone who looked different, spoke different, believed different. The frontier was beautiful and brutal in equal measure, and it devoured the vulnerable without mercy. The attack came at dawn on a Tuesday, sudden and fierce. Maylin was helping Cookie pack up from breakfast when she heard the first shots. She turned to see riders pouring over a low ridge. Not Sioux, as they'd feared, but white men, maybe a dozen of them, guns drawn and aimed at the herd. "Rustlers!" Webb's shout cut through the chaos. "Circle up! Protect the cattle!" Everything happened fast. The cowboys scrambled for their horses and weapons while the rustlers drove hard toward the herd, trying to cut out a section and drive it away. Cattle bellowed and scattered, adding to the confusion. Rhett was already moving, his rifle in hand, shouting orders. "Don't shoot unless they shoot first. We can't afford a war." But the rustlers had no such reservations. Bullets whined through the air, kicking up dirt, and one of them caught Webb in the shoulder. He spun from his saddle and hit the ground hard. "Webb!" Maylin ran toward him without thinking, her mind focused only on the spreading red stain on his shirt. She reached him as he struggled to sit up, his face pale with shock and pain. "Get back to the wagon," he gasped. "Not safe. You're bleeding." She ripped off her apron and pressed it against the wound, applying pressure the way her mother had taught her. "Can you stand?" "Don't think so." More shots rang out. The battle was fully engaged now, cowboys firing at rustlers who were trying to make off with nearly 100 head of cattle. The noise was deafening. Guns, shouting men, panicked cattle. "Cookie!" Maylin screamed. "I need help!" Cookie appeared at her side, took one look at Webb's shoulder, and swore creatively. "Can you keep pressure on that while I get him to the wagon?" "Yes." Together they half-carried, half-dragged Webb to the relative safety of the chuck wagon. Maylin kept her hands pressed firm against the wound, feeling his blood hot and slick against her palms, trying not to think about what would happen if the bleeding didn't stop. Around them, the fight raged. Through gaps in the wagon's canvas, she could see Rhett and the others driving the rustlers back, protecting the herd with fierce determination. But it was close, too close. The rustlers were experienced, organized, and willing to kill for beef. They could sell to railroad camps and mining towns. "Maylin," Webb's voice was faint. "My rifle. In my saddle. You're not going anywhere. Not for me. For you." His eyes were serious despite the pain. If they breach the wagon, you'll need to defend yourself. The thought of shooting another human being made her stomach turn. But she'd already crossed so many lines she'd thought uncrossable. What was one more? She retrieved Webb's rifle, checked that it was loaded, and positioned herself where she could see the approach to the wagon. Her hands shook, but her resolve was steady. The battle seemed to last hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, the rustlers broke and ran, having lost 3 men and gained nothing. The cowboys pursued them for a short distance, then returned to check the herd and count their own losses. Rhett dismounted near the wagon, his face smudged with powder and dust. "Webb?" "Shot in the shoulder," Maylin said. "The bullet went through. He's lost blood, but he'll live if infection doesn't set in." "Can you treat him?" "Yes." She was already gathering supplies, clean cloth, whiskey for sterilizing, needle and thread for stitching. "But he can't ride for at least a week. He needs rest." "We can't afford to stop for a week." "Then we put him in the wagon and move carefully." Maylin looked up at Rhett, her hands bloody, her dress ruined, her hair falling loose from its pins. "I can care for him while we travel, but if you push too hard and tear his stitches, he'll bleed out." Rhett nodded slowly. "All right. We'll take it slow for a few days." He looked at her more closely. "You're shaking." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You just lived through a gunfight and probably saved Webb's life." His voice gentled. "It's all right to be scared." Being scared doesn't help anything. But even as she said it, the adrenaline was draining away, leaving her hollow and trembling. She sat down hard, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. Rhett crouched beside her. "Cookie, you got this?" "Yeah, boss, I'll start cleaning the wound." Rhett guided Maylin away from the wagon to a spot where they could sit on a fallen log and catch their breath. Around them, the other cowboys were checking the herd, rounding up scattered cattle, and seeing to their own minor injuries. "I thought I might have to use Webb's rifle," Maylin said quietly. "I was ready to." "I know, I saw." Rhett's expression was complicated. Respect mixed with something else she couldn't quite identify. "Would you have? If they'd come at the wagon?" "Yes." She surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. "I'm tired of being helpless. Tired of being someone things happen to instead of someone who makes things happen." "You're not helpless. Haven't been since the day you chose to ride away from your father's ranch." He paused. "But killing someone changes you. I've done it, during the war and once since, when I had no choice. It doesn't leave you the same." "Nothing about this life is leaving me the same." "No," he agreed. "I suppose it's not." They sat in silence for a while, watching the camp slowly return to order. The rustlers had taken nothing but had left fear in their wake. Every man knew how close they'd come to disaster. Later that day, with Webb settled in the wagon and dosed with laudanum for the pain, they held a brief meeting to discuss security. The men were spooked, jumping at shadows, and Rhett knew that fear could be as dangerous as rustlers. "We double the night watch," he said. 4 men instead of 2. "And we move faster when we can. Get through this territory before anyone else decides our cattle look attractive." "What about Webb?" Danny asked. He was still weak from his own illness, but insistent on pulling his weight. "Can we really afford to slow down for him?" "We can't afford not to," Rhett said firmly. "We don't leave our own behind. Webb's been with me since Texas. He stays." Nobody argued. Webb was respected, liked, and his loss would be felt deeply. Besides, Maylin had made it clear she could keep him alive, and the men trusted her judgment now. That night, Maylin sat beside Webb's pallet in the wagon, monitoring his breathing, checking his bandages, and trying not to think about how much blood he'd lost. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes fevered. "My wife," he mumbled at one point. "Sarah. Does she know?" "She'll know you're all right," Maylin said, gently pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "You'll see her again, I promise." "Don't make promises you can't keep." "I don't." She adjusted his blanket. "You're strong, Webb. You'll heal." "You sound sure." "I am sure." And saying it, she realized it was true. Webb would survive because she wouldn't allow anything else. She'd lost too many people already, her mother, her family through disownment, the life she'd known. She wasn't losing anyone else if she could help it. Rhett checked on them around midnight. his face haggard with exhaustion and responsibility. "How is he?" "Stable. The fever's mild, just his body fighting the trauma. As long as infection doesn't set in, he'll recover." Maylin looked up from where she sat cross-legged beside the pallet. "You should sleep. You've been up for nearly 24 hours. "So have you." "I'll sleep when I'm sure he's past the worst." She hesitated, then said, "Rhett, those rustlers. They'll try again, won't they?" "Maybe. Probably." He scrubbed a hand over his face. "Word spreads about herds on the trail. We're carrying a fortune in beef, and there are men who'd kill for a fraction of it. Then we need to be smarter, more prepared." "You have ideas?" "Maybe." Maylin's mind was working, turning over possibilities. "We're predictable. We follow the trail, move at expected speeds, camp at obvious water sources. What if we varied our pattern? Moved at odd hours, took less traveled routes, kept our plans to ourselves until the last moment?" Rhett considered that. "It would be harder on the men and the cattle, but it might keep us alive." He smiled slightly. "You've got a strategic mind, Mrs. Calloway. I've spent my whole life looking for exits and calculating odds. This is just a different kind of problem." They talked for another hour, refining ideas, mapping alternative routes, discussing ways to make the outfit less vulnerable. By the time Rhett finally left to catch a few hours of sleep, they'd developed a plan that might, if luck held and the weather cooperated, keep them ahead of trouble. Webb woke properly 2 days later, weak but clear-headed. He found Maylin beside him, the ledger open in her lap, her brush moving in quick, efficient strokes. "You stayed," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Someone had to make sure you didn't die and leave us short-handed." But she smiled as she said it. "How bad is it?" "The shoulder will heal. You'll have limited mobility for a few weeks, but you should recover full use eventually." She set down the brush. "You were lucky. 2 inches to the left and the bullet would have hit your lung. Doesn't feel lucky." "You're alive. That's lucky enough." She poured water from a canteen and helped him drink. "Rest now. We're making good time and the herd's settled." "The boss man treating you all right?" The question surprised her. "Yes." "Why?" "Just checking." Webb's eyes were serious despite his weakness. "You stood by me when I was shot. Didn't run, didn't panic. That means something. And if anyone gives you trouble for being here, you tell me. I'll set them straight. No one's giving me trouble anymore." "Good. Keep it that way." He closed his eyes. "Wake me if there's coffee." "There's always coffee." "Then wake me soon." By the 4th week, they'd crossed into Montana territory, and the land began to change. The harsh, flat expanse of Wyoming gave way to rolling hills, then mountains in the distance, their peaks still white with snow even in summer. The grass was better here, the water more plentiful, and the cattle fattened as they grazed. Maylin stood on a rise one evening, watching the sun set fire to the mountains, and felt something shift in her chest. This land was beautiful in a way Wyoming had never been, wild and generous and full of promise. "It's something, isn't it?" Rhett had approached quietly, his boots crunching on loose rock. "First time I saw these mountains, I knew this was where I wanted to settle." "Where exactly are we going?" "Valley about 80 miles northwest of here. Good water, decent grass, sheltered from the worst storms. I bought the land site unseen 2 years ago. Been working to afford cattle to stock it ever since." He pointed toward the distant peaks, beyond those mountains. "That's home." "Home," Maylin repeated, tasting the word. She'd thought Wyoming was home once, but that had been her father's place, not hers. This could be something different, something chosen rather than inherited. "You thinking you might stay?" Rhett's voice was carefully neutral. "When we get there, I mean. Or are you still planning to take your freedom and go?" "I don't know yet." She turned to face him, the wind pulling strands of hair from her braid. "Ask me when we arrive." "I'll do that." They stood together in companionable silence, watching the light fade and the stars emerge. Somewhere below, the camp was settling for the night, the cattle bedding down, the men swapping stories around the fire. It was a good sound, the sound of people surviving together, working toward a common goal. "Maylin?" Rhett's voice was quiet. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know, having you here, it's been good. For me, for the men." You've made this outfit stronger. Thank you. The words seemed inadequate for what she felt, but they were all she had. I mean it. You're not just the boss's wife anymore. You're part of this crew. They respect you. Hell, some of them would probably follow you before they'd follow me. I doubt that. I don't. He smiled. You saved Danny's life, saved Webb's life, helped fight off rustlers, and you can cook better than Cookie. That makes you damn near irreplaceable. Before she could respond, a shout came from camp. Both of them turned, instantly alert. Boss, Mrs. Calloway, you need to see this. They ran down the slope to find the men gathered around something on the ground. As Maylin pushed through, she saw it. A young cowboy, maybe 19, lying unconscious with a gash on his head and his horse standing nearby, reins trailing. It's Tommy, Wyatt said. Found him like this about 50 yards out. Looks like his horse threw him. Maylin knelt beside the fallen cowboy, checking his pulse, examining the wound. The gash was deep, still bleeding sluggishly, and Tommy's breathing was shallow. Get me water and clean cloth, she ordered. And someone hold a lantern close so I can see what I'm doing. She worked efficiently, cleaning the wound, checking for skull fracture, monitoring his vital signs. The men watched in tense silence, and she could feel their fear. Tommy was young, well-liked, and if he died from something as simple as being thrown from a horse, it would shake morale badly. He's breathing steady, she said after several minutes. The skull seems intact, probably a concussion. He needs to wake up on his own. We can't force it, and he can't ride for several days. That's 2 men down, Danny said. Webb and now Tommy. We're getting awful thin. We'll manage, Rhett said firmly. Put Tommy in the wagon with Webb. Maylin can watch them both. The rest of us will double up on the work. They moved Tommy carefully, settling him beside Webb, who was now sitting up and looking worried despite his own injury. Is he going to make it? Webb asked. I think so, but I need to watch him closely. Maylin sat between the 2 injured men, her medical supplies within easy reach. This is becoming a hospital wagon. Better than a funeral wagon, Webb said grimly. That night, Maylin dozed in fits and starts, waking every hour to check on both men. Tommy remained unconscious but stable, his breathing even. Webb slept fitfully, his shoulder clearly paining him despite the laudanum. Around 3 a.m, Rhett appeared at the back of the wagon with a cup of coffee. Thought you could use this. Thank you. She accepted it gratefully, wrapping her cold hands around the warm tin. You should be sleeping. So should you. He climbed into the wagon and sat across from her, his voice low so as not to wake the sleeping men. How are they? Webb's healing well. Tommy, she shook her head. He should have woken by now. The longer he stays unconscious, the worse the signs. There anything more we can do? Wait. Watch. Hope. She sipped the coffee, bitter and strong. I'm not used to feeling helpless. You're not helpless. You're doing everything possible. Rhett was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you regret it? Leaving Wyoming, coming on this drive, marrying a stranger? Maylin thought about that, about her father's ranch and Thomas Grissom's flat eyes and the life she'd narrowly escaped. She thought about the past 4 weeks, the hard work, the fear, the gradual acceptance, the sense of purpose she'd found in helping these men survive. No, she said finally. I don't regret it. This life is hard, but it's mine. That's more than I ever had before. Even if Tommy dies, even if Webb's shoulder doesn't heal right, even if we lose everything to the next group of rustlers or a stampede or just plain bad luck. Even then, she met his eyes across the dim space. Because at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have chosen. That matters more than success or failure. Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, understanding, connection. They were both gamblers in their own way, both betting everything on a future that might not materialize, both willing to risk failure for the chance at something better. You're remarkable, Rhett said softly. I'm practical, Maylin corrected. Remarkable is what people call you when they don't understand what else to say. He laughed at that, a quiet sound that didn't disturb the sleeping men. Maybe. but I'm saying it anyway. He left shortly after, returning to his own bedroll, and Mei Lin sat alone in the pre-dawn darkness with two injured cowboys and a growing sense that she was exactly where she needed to be, even if the path ahead remained uncertain. Tommy woke at dawn, confused and in pain but alive. His first word was a profanity, which made Webb laugh despite his own discomfort. "Welcome back to the living," Webb said. "What happened?" Tommy tried to sit up, then groaned and collapsed back. "My head feels like it got kicked by a mule." "Close enough. Your horse threw you." Mei Lin checked his pupils, satisfied by what she saw. "You've been unconscious for almost 8 hours. Do you remember anything?" "Was riding night watch. Something spooked Dancer. Maybe a snake, maybe just a shadow. Next thing I know, I'm flying through the air." He touched the bandage on his head gingerly. "Did you patch me up?" "Yes. Thanks." He managed a weak smile. "Guess I owe you my life, same as Danny and Webb." "You don't owe me anything. Just rest and heal so you can get back to work." "Yes, ma'am." The news of Tommy's recovery spread through camp like sunshine after rain. The men were relieved, grateful, and more convinced than ever that Mei Lin was some kind of miracle worker. She tried to downplay it, to explain that she'd simply done what her mother had taught her, but they weren't interested in modesty. "3 for 3, Cookie told her that evening as they prepared dinner. "You haven't lost a patient yet. That's because I've been lucky. Luck's got nothing to do with it. You've got skill and you've got heart. That's what saves people." By the end of the 5th week, both Webb and Tommy were back on their feet, moving slowly and carefully, but functional. The herd was in good condition, the weather had held, and they were making steady progress toward Rhett's Valley. But Mei Lin knew better than to relax. The frontier had taught her that disaster could strike at any moment, from any direction. And she was right to be cautious. The storm came on a Wednesday, building slowly throughout the day, dark clouds massing on the horizon, the air growing thick and oppressive, the cattle growing restless and skittish. "We need to find shelter," Rhett said, scanning the sky with worried eyes. "Get the herd into that canyon up ahead. Keep them bunched tight." They moved quickly, driving the cattle into a narrow canyon with steep walls that would provide some protection from wind and rain. But even as they worked, Mei Lin could feel the storm's power building, pressing down on them like a physical weight. The first drops fell just as they got the last of the herd into position. Then the sky opened up, and the world became water and wind and thunder that shook the ground. The cattle panicked immediately. Mei Lin had never seen a stampede before, but she understood it instantly. 1,000 terrified animals trying to run from fear itself, crushing anything in their path. The thunder was deafening, the lightning turning night to day in jagged bursts, and beneath it all the roar of hooves like an avalanche. "Hold them!" Rhett's voice was barely audible over the chaos. "Don't let them scatter!" The cowboys fought to keep the herd contained, their horses dancing on the edge of disaster, their voices hoarse from shouting. Mei Lin clung to the wagon, watching with her heart in her throat as the men risked their lives to save the cattle that represented Rhett's entire future. Then she saw it. Tommy's horse losing its footing in the mud. Tommy falling, the stampede bearing down on him like a wall of death. She didn't think, she just moved. Mei Lin grabbed Webb's rifle from the wagon and fired 3 shots into the air, the reports cutting through even the storm's fury. The nearest cattle veered away from the noise, creating a momentary gap. She fired 3 more times, hurting them with sound, giving Tommy precious seconds. "Get up!" she screamed, though she knew he couldn't hear her. "Move!" Tommy scrambled to his feet, slipping in the mud, and dove for the canyon wall just as the herd thundered past. He pressed himself against the rock, and the cattle flowed around him like a river around a stone, missing him by inches. When the storm finally broke and the cattle settled, shaking and exhausted, Tommy was alive. Muddy, terrified, probably bruised from head to toe, but alive. He found Mei Lin afterward, his eyes wide with shock and gratitude. "You saved my life. You saved yourself. I just bought you time. That's all I needed." He hugged her, quick and fierce, then let go, looking embarrassed. "Thank you, ma'am. I won't forget it." None of them would forget it. Mei Lin had faced down a stampede with nothing but a rifle and nerve, and she'd won. The story would be told around campfires for years. The Chinese woman who stood against 1,000 head of cattle and made them blink first. That night, as they made camp and counted their blessings that they'd lost no men and only a handful of cattle, Rhett found her sitting alone, staring at the stars that had emerged after the storm. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," he said quietly. "That was the stupidest thing I've ever done," Maylin countered. "I could have been killed." "But you weren't, and Tommy's alive because of you." He sat down beside her. "You know what that means, don't you?" "What?" "You're not just part of this crew anymore. You're one of us completely. Blood and bone, trail dust and courage. You belong here." Maylin looked at him, at his serious eyes and his sun-weathered face and the strength in his shoulders that came from carrying responsibility for 12 men and 1,000 cattle. And she realized something that should have terrified her, but didn't. She was falling in love with him, not because he'd saved her, but because he'd given her room to save herself. Not because he was handsome or charming, but because he was honest and fair and treated her like an equal. Not because she needed him, but because she wanted him. "Rhett," she said softly. "Yes?" "Ask me again. About staying." He turned to face her fully, hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. "When we reach Montana, will you stay? Not because of our arrangement, but because you want to?" "Yes," Maylin said. "I'll stay." His smile was like sunrise after a long night. "I was hoping you'd say that." They sat together under the stars, two people who'd started as strangers and become partners, watching over a herd that represented all their hopes and all their risks. The trail stretched ahead, still uncertain, still dangerous, but they would face it together, and that made all the difference. The mountains grew closer with each passing day, their peaks sharp against the sky like broken teeth. Maylin felt their pull, the promise of the valley beyond them, the ranch that would either be salvation or just another kind of struggle. But for the first time in her life, she was moving toward something she'd chosen rather than running from something chosen for her, and that made all the difference. The morning after her promise to stay, Rhett was different around her. Not awkward exactly, but more conscious of her presence. His hand would linger a moment longer when he helped her down from her horse. His eyes would find her across the camp, checking, assessing, seeing her in a way that made her pulse quicken. They were still married in name only, still sleeping in separate bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. But something had shifted. The possibility of more hung between them like morning mist, visible but not yet solid enough to grasp. "You're making moon eyes at the boss," Cookie observed one afternoon as they prepared dinner. "Noticed it's mutual, too." "I don't know what you're talking about." Maylin focused intently on cutting potatoes, her cheeks warm. "Sure you don't." Cookie's weathered face creased in a knowing smile. "For what it's worth, I think you're good for him. Man's been alone too long, carrying too much weight by himself. He needs a partner, not just a wife on paper." "We barely know each other." "You know him well enough, seen him under pressure, seen how he treats his men, seen what he values. That's more than most folks know before they marry." Cookie stirred the pot with vigorous efficiency. "Out here, you learn quick or you die. Ain't time for lengthy courtships and fancy dances. You know what you need to know? He's honest, he's fair, and he looks at you like you hung the moon. Rest will sort itself." Maylin wanted to argue, but Cookie had a point. She did know Rhett in ways that mattered, knew his courage and his kindness, his stubborn determination and his capacity for fairness, knew he'd offered her freedom when he could have demanded obedience, had treated her as an equal when the world said she was less. That evening, as the sun painted the mountains gold and crimson, Rhett sought her out where she sat updating the ledger. "Walk with me?" he asked. They moved away from camp, following a small creek that burbled over smooth stones. The air was cool and clean, scented with pine and sage. Somewhere nearby, a bird called, its song lonely and beautiful. "In 2 days, we'll reach my land," Rhett said. "The valley I told you about. I want you to see it before you make any final decisions." "I already told you I'd stay." "I know, but I want you to see what you're staying for." He picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the creek. "It's rough country. The house is barely more than a cabin. I built it myself 2 years ago. Haven't had time to do much with it since. There's work that'll break your back, winters that'll freeze your soul, and isolation that'll test your sanity. It's not an easy life." "I've never had an easy life." Maylin watched the ripples from his stone spread and fade. Why are you telling me this? Having second thoughts? No? He turned to face her, his expression serious. But I need you to understand what you're choosing. This isn't Wyoming, where there were neighbors within riding distance and a town close enough for supplies. This is frontier in the truest sense, raw, wild, unforgiving. And I need to know you're choosing it with your eyes open, not just running from what's behind you. She considered that, looking past him to the mountains that held his valley, his future, potentially her future too. I'm not running anymore. I'm choosing. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. She met his gaze squarely. Running is reactive. You flee from danger without thinking about where you're going. Choosing is active. You move towards something because you believe in it, even knowing the cost. She paused. I'm choosing this, Rhett. Choosing you. Choosing this life. Not because it's easy or safe, but because it's mine. Something in his face softened. All right then. Just wanted to be sure. They stood together in the fading light, the creek singing its ancient song, the mountains standing witness. Mei-Lin felt the moment crystallize, becoming memory even as it happened. The two of them at a threshold, about to step across into something new and uncertain and possibly beautiful. Mei-Lin, Rhett said quietly, I know we started this as an arrangement, a practical solution to a practical problem, but somewhere along the trail it became something else for me. Something real. Her heart hammered against her ribs. For me too. I don't want to pressure you, don't want you to feel obligated because of the marriage certificate or because you think you owe me. But I need you to know, when I look at you, I don't see a convenience or a business arrangement. I see a partner, someone I could build a life with, if you wanted that too. I want that, Mei-Lin said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning in her chest. But I need you to understand something too. I'm not the woman you might have imagined for a wife. I'm opinionated. I argue when I think you're wrong, and I won't simply obey because you're my husband. If we do this, if we make this marriage real, it has to be as equals. I wouldn't want it any other way, Rhett smiled. I married you because you had fire in you, Mei-Lin. I'm not fool enough to try and put it out now. She laughed, sudden and genuine. Good. Because I'm tired of pretending to be small to make men comfortable. Then don't. He reached out, took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. Be exactly who you are. That's more than enough. They walked back to camp hand in hand, and Mei-Lin felt something settle in her chest. Not certainty exactly, but rightness. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that was more than she'd ever hoped for when she'd fled her father's ranch in the pre-dawn darkness 6 weeks ago. But the frontier had a way of testing hope. 2 days later, they crested a rise and saw the valley spread below them, a sweep of green bordered by mountains, with a creek running silver through its center. It was beautiful, untouched, perfect. And there was smoke rising from the cabin that shouldn't have been occupied. Rhett pulled up short, his face going hard. Someone's on my land. Webb rode up beside them, his shoulders still healing but his eyes sharp. Could be squatters. Happens sometimes. Folks move onto land they don't own. Figure possession is 9/10 of the law. Or could be something worse, Wyatt added grimly. Could be someone with a legal claim they bought or stole. You know how it works out here. Land titles get confused, claims get filed in triplicate, and whoever's got the most lawyers usually wins. Rhett's jaw was tight. I've got the deed, bought it legal, filed it proper. That's my land. Then let's go find out who's trying to take it, Mei-Lin said. They approached the cabin carefully, the whole outfit moving as one. As they drew closer, Mei-Lin could see changes. A new corral, a barn that hadn't been there before, curtains in the windows. Someone had made themselves comfortable. A man emerged from the cabin as they rode up, rifle in hand but not raised. He was perhaps 50, stocky and gray-bearded, with eyes that assessed them coolly. Help you folks? He asked, his tone suggesting they were the intruders, not him. This is my land, Rhett said flatly. I've got the deed to prove it. Who are you and what are you doing here? Name's Garrett Hayes, and I've got a deed too, friend. Says this land belongs to me, bought and paid for 3 months back from a man named Peterson who claimed he owned it. Peterson had no right to sell it. I bought this property 2 years ago from the territorial office. Have the papers in my saddlebag if you want to see them. Hayes's expression didn't change. So do I. Seems we've got ourselves a situation. More people emerged from the cabin. A woman, two half-grown children, and another man who looked enough like Hayes to be his brother. They all watched with varying degrees of hostility and wariness. This is a trick that gets pulled sometimes, Webb said quietly to Rhett. Con man sells the same land to multiple buyers, pockets the money, and disappears. Leaves the buyers to fight it out amongst themselves. I'm not leaving, Rhett said, loud enough for Hayes to hear. This is my land, bought legal. I've got 1,000 head of cattle that need this grazing, and I've got 12 people depending on me to make this work. We're not going anywhere. Neither are we, Hayes said firmly. I moved my whole family here, built that barn with my own hands. We're settled, and we're staying. Then we've got a problem. Rhett's hand moved toward his rifle. Rhett, wait. Maylin urged her horse forward, positioning herself between the two men. Both looked at her with surprise, but she ignored them, focusing on Hayes's wife, who stood on the cabin porch with her hand on her daughter's shoulder. Mrs. Hayes, Maylin said, addressing the woman directly, how long have you been here? The woman glanced at her husband, then answered, 3 months. We came from Kansas. Drought killed our farm, and we used everything we had to buy this land and start over. So did we, Maylin said quietly. We came from Wyoming, drought and debt. Mr. Calloway here spent everything he had to buy cattle and this land. We've driven those cattle over 400 miles to get here. Both our families have staked everything on this valley. Then both our families can't stay, Hayes said. Ain't enough land for 2 operations. Maybe there is. Maylin turned to Rhett. How much land did you buy? 500 acres, the valley, and the eastern slope. And you, Mr. Hayes? 500 acres, the valley and the western slope. Maylin did quick calculations in her head. So there's overlap. Probably the valley bottom, where both deeds claim ownership. But the slopes are separate. Mr. Calloway, could you run cattle on the eastern slope alone? Possibly. It'd be tight, but possible. And Mr. Hayes, can you farm the western slope? We plan to farm the valley bottom, run some livestock on the slopes. But yes, we could work with just the west. Then here's what I propose, Maylin said, her mind working fast. We take this to the territorial court, get a judge to sort out the legal mess. In the meantime, we divide the valley at the creek. East side for us, west side for you. We both start building our operations, and when the court rules, whoever loses their claim gets compensated by whoever wins. Fair market value, enough to start over somewhere else. Why would we agree to that? Hayes asked suspiciously. Because the alternative is violence, Maylin said bluntly. You've got your family here. We've got 12 men and 1,000 cattle. If this turns to shooting, people will die. Probably your children, probably our cowboys. Is that really what you want? Mrs. Hayes spoke up, her voice shaking slightly. Garrett, she's right. We can't risk the children. If there's a peaceful way— There might not be any peaceful way, Hayes interrupted. Courts out here are corrupt as hell. Whoever's got the most money or the best connections usually wins, regardless of who's actually got the legal claim. Then we make a pact, Rhett said, clearly thinking through Maylin's proposal. Put it in writing, signed by both of us. If the court rules in your favor, I'll pay you for your improvements and leave peacefully. If it rules in mine, you do the same. And in the meantime, we work our separate sections and stay out of each other's way. Hayes studied them for a long moment, his rifle still in his hands. Finally, he said, I want to see your deed, and you can see mine. Let's at least figure out if we're both victims of the same con man. They gathered in the cabin, spreading both deeds on the rough-hewn table, while Maylin examined them with the careful eye she'd developed from keeping her father's accounts. Both looked legitimate on the surface. Proper seals, official signatures, detailed boundary descriptions. But there were subtle differences that suggested one or both might be fraudulent. These descriptions don't quite match, she said, pointing to specific passages. Yours says from the creek northward to the ridge. His says from the creek southward to the ridge. Someone drew up these deeds specifically to create confusion. Peterson, Hayes spat. Son of a bitch sold us both the same land, just described it differently enough that we wouldn't know until we both showed up. Is Peterson still around? Rhett asked. No idea. Haven't seen him since we closed the deal. He said he was heading to California. Of course he did. Rhett's voice was bitter. Probably did this to a dozen people up and down the territory. They talked for hours, comparing notes, examining documents, and slowly coming to the realization that they were indeed both victims. Neither family wanted to leave, but neither could afford to fight a protracted legal battle while trying to establish their operation. Finally, Mei Lin proposed a modification to her original plan. What if we don't wait for the court? What if we pool our resources temporarily, work the land together for one season, and then either buy each other out based on who's contributed what, or formalize a partnership if it works well? Both men stared at her like she'd suggested they sprout wings and fly. You want us to share the land? Hayes sounded incredulous. I want us to survive, Mei Lin corrected. You've got a family that needs feeding. We've got 1,000 cattle that need grazing. You've already built a barn and started improvements. We've got experienced cowboys and resources. Together, we might all make it. Separately, we might all fail. She's got a point, Mrs. Hayes said quietly. Garrett, we're down to our last $50. We can't afford to start over somewhere else, even if we wanted to. And we've got everything tied up in those cattle, Rhett added. If we have to move them again, we'll run weight off them and lose value. Plus, there's no guarantee we'll find better land that isn't already claimed or contested. Hayes looked at his wife, at his children, at his brother. Then he looked at Rhett and Mei Lin. One season. We work together, see how it goes. But I want it in writing, proper shares, proper accounting, proper division of labor and profits. And if it doesn't work, we part ways fair. Agreed, Rhett said. Mei Lin can draw up the contract. She's better with words and numbers than any of us. They shook on it, a tentative partnership born of necessity and mutual desperation. The Cowboys were skeptical when they heard the plan, and Mrs. Hayes, whose name was Catherine, was clearly nervous about sharing the valley with a dozen rough men and a Chinese woman who'd married a stranger. But desperation makes strange bedfellows, and the frontier doesn't offer many second chances. That night, both families made camp in the valley, the Hayes family in their cabin, Rhett's outfit in a temporary camp near the creek. Mei Lin sat by the fire working on the partnership contract by lamplight, scratching out clauses and provisions with careful precision. Rhett sat beside her, watching her work. You just negotiated peace and possibly saved both our operations. You realize that? I just did what made sense. Fighting would have destroyed us all. Most people don't think that clearly when their dreams are being threatened. He was quiet for a moment. You're remarkable, Mei Lin. I don't tell you that enough. You tell me plenty. She dipped her pen in ink, added another line to the contract. Besides, I'm protecting my own interests too. I chose this valley, same as you. I'm not giving it up without a fight, but I'm also not fool enough to think violence is the answer when negotiation might work. Your father must have been blind not to see what he had in you. My father saw exactly what he wanted to see. A daughter who could be traded for what he needed. He just didn't expect me to refuse the trade. She set down her pen. Do you think this partnership will work? Really? Honestly? I don't know. Hayes seems like a decent man, but we're strangers sharing limited resources. That's a recipe for conflict. Then we'll have to be smarter than the conflict, Mei Lin said. Set clear boundaries, keep clear accounts, communicate honestly. It's not that different from running a cattle drive. Everyone has their role, everyone pulls their weight, and disputes get settled before they fester. You make it sound simple. It won't be simple, but it's possible, and right now possible is better than the alternative. The contract took 3 days to finalize, with both families contributing input and negotiating terms. Mei Lin mediated the discussions with a combination of practicality and firmness, refusing to let emotions override logic. By the time everyone signed, they had a document that clearly spelled out each family's responsibilities, rights, and share of any profits. They divided the valley at the creek, as Mei Lin had originally proposed. The Hayes family would farm the western side and run a small herd of livestock. Rhett's outfit would graze cattle on the eastern side and help with heavy labor in exchange for a share of the crops. Both families would share the barn, the well, and the existing cabin until Rhett could build his own. It was awkward at first, two families learning to work alongside each other, navigating different customs and different expectations. Catherine Hayes was initially wary of Mei Lin, not quite sure what to make of a Chinese woman who kept accounts, spoke her mind, and had clearly earned the respect of a dozen rough cowboys. But Mei Lin had learned long ago that action spoke louder than ancestry. She helped Catherine with washing, shared recipes, and watched the Hayes children when their mother needed an extra pair of hands. Slowly, the wariness transformed into something approaching friendship. "I've never met anyone like you," Catherine admitted one afternoon as they hung laundry together. "The way you speak up, the way the men listen to you. It's unusual." "I had to earn it," Mei Lin said, pinning a sheet to the line. "They didn't respect me at first. Some of them still don't, not completely. But I proved I could pull my weight, and that mattered more than what I looked like or where I came from. I wish I had that kind of courage." "You do. You moved your whole family across the country to start over. That takes enormous courage." Catherine was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm glad you're here. I was worried about being the only woman in this valley, surrounded by cowboys and chaos. It's nice to have another woman to talk to." "Even if that woman is Chinese?" "Especially because you're Chinese," Catherine said firmly. "My children need to see that people are people, regardless of what they look like. This territory is going to be different than Kansas. Might as well teach them to be open-minded." Mei Lin felt something warm bloom in her chest. Acceptance, maybe. Or just the recognition that not everyone judged her by her appearance. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. You're the one making this partnership work. Garrett said so just last night, said you're the glue holding both families together." It was true in a way Mei Lin hadn't quite recognized. She'd become the bridge between the two families, translating not just words but intentions, smoothing over misunderstandings before they became conflicts, keeping the account so transparent that neither side could accuse the other of cheating. It was exhausting work, but it was also deeply satisfying. She was building something here, not just a ranch or a farm, but a community. A place where people worked together despite their differences, where hard work mattered more than heritage. 3 weeks into the partnership, disaster struck again. A rider came galloping into the valley at full speed, his horse lathered and blowing. He pulled up near where Rhett and Garrett were mending fence, his face flushed with urgency. "You Rhett Calloway?" he gasped. "I am." "Got a message from town. There's a U.S. Marshal on his way here. Says he's got a warrant for your arrest." The words fell like stones into still water, ripples of shock spreading through everyone within earshot. "Warrant for what?" Rhett's voice was carefully controlled. "Kidnapping. Some land baron named Grissom filed federal charges. Says you abducted a Chinese woman in Wyoming territory, married her against her will, and fled across state lines to avoid prosecution." Mei Lin felt ice settle in her stomach. Thomas Grissom. Of course. The man couldn't accept defeat, couldn't stomach the fact that she'd chosen freedom over his golden cage. So he'd used his money and influence to turn her escape into a crime. "When's the marshal due?" Garrett asked, his face grim. "Tomorrow, maybe the day after. He's bringing deputies. Said he's got orders to arrest Calloway and take the woman back to Wyoming for questioning." "Like hell," Webb growled. He'd been standing nearby and now he stepped forward, his hand on his pistol. "They ain't taking the boss, and they sure as hell ain't taking Mrs. Calloway." "Easy," Rhett said, but his face was tight with anger. "Let's think this through." They gathered in the Hayes cabin, both families, all the cowboys, everyone with a stake in what happened next. The partnership was too new to be tested like this, too fragile to withstand the kind of pressure a federal marshal could bring. "You need to run," Wyatt said bluntly. "Both of you. Get out of the territory before the marshal arrives." "Running makes us look guilty," Mei Lin countered. "And it gives Grissom exactly what he wants, proof that we're criminals fleeing justice." "But if they arrest you," Catherine started. "Then I'll tell the truth," Mei Lin interrupted. "I'll testify that I wasn't kidnapped, that the marriage was my choice, that Rhett offered me freedom when my own father tried to sell me." "Your word against Grissom's," Garrett said. "And he's got money, influence, lawyers. What do you have?" "The truth," Mei Lin said simply. "And people who'll vouch for me." "Catherine, you've seen how Rhett and I are together. You've seen that this partnership is real. Would you testify to that?" Catherine looked at her husband, who nodded slowly. "We'll testify," she said. "Both of us. You saved our operation by proposing this partnership. We owe you." "Webb, Danny, Tommy," Mei Lin turned to the cowboys. "You've ridden with us. You've seen everything. Would you speak for us?" "Hell yes," Webb said immediately. The others nodded in agreement, faces set with determination. Then we don't run, Rhett said, his voice firm. We stand our ground. We let the marshal come, and we prove that Grissom's charges are false. But standing their ground meant waiting, and waiting meant tension that wound tighter with each passing hour. Maylin tried to focus on work, on the accounts and the cooking and the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch running, but her mind kept circling back to the same fear. What if the marshal didn't care about the truth? What if Grissom's money had already bought a verdict? That night, she and Rhett walked along the creek, both of them too anxious to sleep. I'm sorry, Rhett said quietly. Sorry I dragged you into this. If I'd known Grissom would go this far. You'd have done the same thing, Maylin interrupted, because it was the right thing. And I'd have made the same choice, knowing the consequences. She stopped walking, turned to face him. I don't regret marrying you, Rhett. Not even now, with a marshal on the way and my freedom on the line. I regret nothing. He pulled her close, and she went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady drum of his heartbeat. They'd been married for weeks, but had never truly acted as husband and wife, maintaining the fiction of an arrangement even after they'd admitted their feelings. But now, with everything uncertain, with tomorrow potentially bringing catastrophe, pretense seemed pointless. I love you, Rhett said into her hair. I know it's fast, know we've barely had time to figure out what this is between us, but I love you, Maylin, and if that marshal tries to take you, he'll have to go through me first. I love you too, she whispered, and I'm not going anywhere without a fight. They stood together in the moonlight, holding each other against the darkness and the fear, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds and refused to let go. The marshal arrived at noon the next day, riding in with 3 deputies and an air of grim authority. He was a tall man with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. I'm looking for Rhett Calloway and Maylin Zhao, he announced. I'm Rhett Calloway. This is my wife, Maylin Calloway. Rhett stepped forward, his posture relaxed but ready. You have business with us? The marshal pulled out a folded document. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of kidnapping and unlawful flight, and I have orders to take Mrs. Calloway into protective custody pending investigation of her claims. She's not going anywhere, Webb said, moving to stand beside Rhett. Within seconds, all 12 cowboys had formed a protective semicircle, hands near their weapons. The marshal's deputies tensed, but the marshal himself held up a hand. Easy, boys. Let's keep this civilized. I'm just here to enforce the law, not start a war. Then you should know the law's been misused, Maylin said, stepping forward. She held herself with perfect composure, her voice steady and clear. I wasn't kidnapped. I married Mr. Calloway willingly, legally, to escape an arranged marriage to a man named Thomas Grissom, a man whose previous 2 wives died under suspicious circumstances, a man who tried to buy me from my father like livestock. The marshal's expression didn't change. That's a serious accusation, ma'am. It's the truth, and I have witnesses who'll confirm it. She gestured to the assembled crowd, cowboys, the Hayes family, everyone who'd seen her and Rhett together. These people will testify that our marriage is genuine, that I came here of my own free will, and that I've been treated with nothing but respect. Witnesses can be bought or intimidated, one of the deputies muttered. Then let me make this simple. Garrett Hayes stepped forward, surprising everyone. I'm Garrett Hayes. I have no connection to these folks, except we're sharing this valley. I've watched them for 3 weeks now. That woman there is no victim. She runs half this operation, keeps the books, makes the decisions alongside her husband. She's got more freedom and more say than most married women I've ever met. If she was kidnapped, she's the most content kidnapped victim in history. Catherine moved to stand beside her husband. And I'll testify the same. In a court, under oath, in front of any judge you want. Mrs. Calloway is here by choice. The marshal studied them all. The unified front, the determined faces, the obvious respect everyone showed toward Maylin. Then he looked at Maylin herself, really looked at her, and seemed to see what Rhett had seen from the beginning, a woman with fire and strength and an iron will beneath the gentle surface. Ma'am, he said slowly, I need to ask you directly, and I need you to answer honestly. Did this man kidnap you, coerce you, force you into marriage against your will? No, Maylin said firmly. He offered me a choice when I had none. He married me to protect me from a man who would have destroyed me, and he's treated me with more honor and respect than any man I've ever known. If that's kidnapping, Marshal, then I'm grateful for it." The Marshal was quiet for a long moment, turning his hat in his hands. Then he sighed. "I'm going to need to investigate this properly. Talk to witnesses, review documents, send telegrams to Wyoming to verify your claims. That's going to take time." "How much time?" Rhett asked. "Couple weeks, maybe more. In the meantime," he looked at his deputies, then back at Rhett and Mei Lin. "I'm inclined to leave you both here, on your own recognizance, provided you agree not to leave the territory." "Can you do that?" "Yes," they said in unison. "All right then, I'll be back in 2 weeks with my findings. If your stories check out and I can't find evidence of coercion, I'll recommend the charges be dropped. If not," he left the threat hanging. "Our stories will check out," Mei Lin said, "because they're true." The Marshal and his deputies rode away, leaving behind a group of people who'd just faced down federal law and won, at least temporarily. The relief was palpable, but so was the understanding that the threat wasn't truly gone. Grissom would try again. Men like him always did. But for now, they had time. Time to build their case, time to strengthen their position, time to prove that Mei Lin's choice had been just that, a choice. And as Rhett pulled her into his arms, and the Cowboys cheered, and the Hayes family smiled with genuine relief, Mei Lin understood something profound. She'd found more than freedom on this Montana valley. She'd found family, purpose, and love. She'd found people willing to stand beside her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. She'd found home, and she would fight with everything she had to keep it. The 2 weeks that followed were the longest of Mei Lin's life. Every day brought the possibility that the Marshal would return with evidence manufactured by Grissom's lawyers, or that new charges would materialize, or that the fragile peace they'd built would shatter under pressure from forces they couldn't control. But they didn't waste time waiting passively. Rhett sent telegrams to Judge Wilson in Wyoming, requesting sworn testimony about the marriage. Webb rode to the nearest town and convinced the local newspaper editor to print a detailed account of Mei Lin's story, including descriptions of Grissom's previous wives and the suspicious circumstances of their deaths. Catherine helped Mei Lin write letters to territorial officials, clearly and calmly laying out the facts. They were building a wall of truth, brick by brick, document by document, hoping it would be strong enough to withstand whatever Grissom threw at them. The valley itself seemed to sense the tension. Work continued, cattle to tend, crops to plant, fences to mend, but everyone moved with an edge of anxiety, glancing toward the southern trail as if expecting armed men to appear at any moment. On the 5th day, a different rider arrived. Not the Marshal, but a young man in a dusty suit who identified himself as a clerk from the territorial court. He carried a leather satchel stuffed with documents and an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "I'm here to conduct depositions," he announced. "Marshal Bradley sent me. He wants statements from everyone involved, recorded and notarized, before he makes his final report." They spent the next 3 days answering questions, each person giving their account of events. The clerk wrote everything down in meticulous detail, occasionally asking for clarification or pressing on points that seemed inconsistent. Mei Lin watched him carefully, trying to gauge whether he was sympathetic or simply neutral, whether their words were landing or sliding off like rain on rock. When it was her turn, she told the whole story: her father's debt, Grissom's proposal, the fear that had driven her to accept Rhett's offer, the choice she'd made in the darkness before dawn. She didn't embellish or dramatize. She simply spoke the truth as clearly as she could, letting the facts speak for themselves. "And you're certain," the clerk asked, his pen poised over the page, "that Mr. Calloway never coerced you, never threatened you or your family?" "The only person who threatened me was Thomas Grissom," Mei Lin said. "Rhett offered me a way out. That's not coercion. That's mercy." The clerk made a note, his expression unreadable. "And you're happy here? In this arrangement?" "I'm more than happy. I'm free." She met his eyes steadily. "That's worth more than any amount of money or comfort Mr. Grissom could have provided." After the clerk left, taking his satchel full of sworn statements back to wherever the Marshal was conducting his investigation, an uneasy quiet settled over the valley. They'd done everything they could. Now they could only wait. Rhett found Mei Lin that evening sitting on the porch of the half-built cabin he'd started constructing on their side of the creek. The structure was still skeletal, just a frame and a partial roof, but it represented their future, the life they were trying to build together. "You all right?" he asked, settling beside her on the rough planks. "I keep thinking about my father," she admitted. "About June. Wondering if they're all right, if the ranch survived, if they hate me for leaving." "You had to leave. They gave you no choice." "I know, but knowing something and feeling it are different things." She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "My mother used to say that family was everything, that we sacrifice for family no matter the cost. I used to believe that. And now? Now I think family is the people who see you as you are and value you anyway. The people who stand beside you when the world says you're wrong." She gestured toward the valley, where lights were beginning to appear in the Hayes cabin and around the Cowboys' campfires. "These people, you, Catherine, Webb, even Garrett, who barely knows us, they all stood up for me. That's family. Real family." Rhett took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "When this is over, when the marshal clears us and Grissom's charges fall apart, what do you want to do? Build this cabin? Expand the herd? Something else?" "I want to make this valley into something good," Maylin said slowly. "A place where people can start over. Where what you were doesn't matter as much as what you do. A place where women have choices and children grow up seeing all kinds of people working together." She looked at him. "Is that naive?" "No, it's ambitious, but you've never been one to think small." He smiled. "I like it. We'll make it happen." They sat together as the stars came out, talking about plans and possibilities, letting hope push back against fear. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. The valley was alive with sound and motion, settling into night. And for a moment, Maylin could almost forget that her entire future hung in the balance of a marshal's investigation and a corrupt land baron's wounded pride. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Maylin was helping Catherine hang laundry when she heard the commotion, horses arriving, men's voices raised in greeting and surprise. She turned to see 3 riders coming up the trail, and her heart stopped. One of them was her father. Chen Zhao sat rigid in his saddle, his face carved from stone, his eyes finding Maylin across the distance. Beside him rode June, now taller and leaner than she remembered, his young face tight with an emotion she couldn't read. And the third rider, Billy Tucker, the ranch hand who'd warned them about the posse, who'd chosen to ride with Rhett rather than stay with her father. "Maylin!" June dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, running toward her. She met him halfway, and he grabbed her in a fierce hug that knocked the breath from her lungs. "I thought I'd never see you again." "June." She held him tight, feeling tears burn behind her eyes. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" "Billy told us where you'd gone, and Father—" June pulled back, his eyes searching her face. "Father needs to talk to you. Please, Maylin. He's come a long way." Her father had dismounted and was walking toward them slowly, his gait stiff from long riding. He looked older than she remembered, worn down by something more than just the drought. When he reached them, he stopped, studying Maylin with an expression she'd never seen before. Was it regret? "Daughter." His voice was rough, the words seeming to cost him. "I have come to speak with you." "I'm not your daughter anymore," Maylin said, hearing the steadiness in her own voice despite the turmoil in her chest. "You said so yourself. You disowned me." "I was wrong." The admission seemed to physically pain him. "I have been wrong about many things." Rhett had appeared at Maylin's side, his presence solid and protective. Chen Zhao's eyes flicked to him, assessing, then back to Maylin. "You will hear me?" her father asked. It wasn't quite a plea, but it was closer than she'd ever heard him come. "I'll hear you." She gestured toward the cabin. "We can talk inside." They gathered in the Hayes cabin, Maylin, Rhett, her father, June, and Billy. Catherine offered tea with quiet courtesy, then withdrew to give them privacy. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Finally, Chen Zhao began. "After you left, I was angry. Angry at you, angry at this man who took you, angry at myself for losing control of my family." He spoke in English, heavily accented but clear. "I wanted the marriage to Grissom, wanted the water rights, the cattle, the security. I thought I was protecting the family, doing what was necessary." You were selling me, Mei Lin said quietly. Yes. The admission was stark, brutal. I was selling you. I told myself it was duty, tradition, practical thinking, but it was selling. He looked down at his hands, weathered and scarred from decades of ranch work. After you left, Grissom was very angry. He wanted to pursue you, wanted revenge. He pushed me to file charges, to call you kidnapped. He said we would get you back, force the annulment, make the original arrangement stand. And you agreed? Rhett's voice was hard. At first, yes. I was angry, prideful. I thought you had shamed me, Mei Lin, made me look weak, unable to control my own daughter. Chen Zhao's jaw worked, but then things began to happen. Grissom became more insistent, more aggressive. He spoke of you as if you were property he had purchased but not yet received. He spoke of what he would do when he got you back, how he would teach you obedience, break your spirit. June spoke up, his young voice shaking with anger. He said terrible things, Mei Lin, things about what he'd do to you, how he'd make sure you never disobeyed again. Father finally heard what kind of man he'd tried to give you to. And then I learned about his wives, Chen Zhao continued. Not rumors, truth. I spoke to a man who had been sheriff during the second wife's death. He told me things that were never made public. How Grissom beat her, terrorized her, finally killed her. How he paid to have it covered up. He raised his eyes to Mei Lin's, and she saw something she'd never seen there before. Shame. I would have sent you to that. My own daughter, for water and cattle. So you came here to say you're sorry? Mei Lin's voice was level, but her hands trembled slightly. To ask for forgiveness? I came to tell you the truth about Grissom, to warn you that he is dangerous, that he will not stop. Chen Zhao reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. And to give you these. Mei Lin took the envelope and opened it. Inside were documents, legal papers, affidavits, sworn statements. She read through them quickly, her eyes widening. Father, what is this? Evidence. Testimony from people who knew Grissom's wives, who saw the bruises and heard the screams. Medical records showing injuries that were explained away as accidents. Financial records showing payments made to law enforcement and court officials to ensure silence. Chen Zhao's voice was tired. I have spent the last 6 weeks gathering this information. It was not easy. Many people are afraid of Grissom, afraid to speak against him. But I convinced them, paid them when necessary, and now I give it to you. Rhett took the papers from Mei Lin's shaking hands and began reading. His expression grew darker with each page. This is damning. This proves Grissom is a murderer, a predator. Why give this to us? Why not take it to the law yourself? Because I am the one who tried to sell my daughter to this monster, Chen Zhao said bluntly. My testimony would be questioned, attacked, dismissed. But Mei Lin, her testimony, combined with this evidence, with the witnesses I have found, that will destroy him, that will ensure he never hurts another woman. There's a U.S. Marshal investigating right now, Mei Lin said, her mind racing. He's looking into Grissom's kidnapping charges against Rhett. If we give him this evidence, the investigation will reverse, Rhett finished. Instead of investigating me, he'll be investigating Grissom. For murder, for fraud, for corruption. He looked at Chen Zhao with new respect. You did this to protect your daughter, even after she left you. I did this because it should have been done years ago, Chen Zhao corrected. I did this because I failed her once. I will not fail her again. Mei Lin felt tears spill over, hot against her cheeks. Father, I do not ask for forgiveness, he interrupted. I do not deserve it, but I ask that you take this evidence and use it. Stop Grissom. Make sure no other family suffers as we have suffered. Jun moved to stand beside his father, his hand on the older man's shoulder. Mei Lin, the ranch is failing. We lost most of the cattle to drought. We have nothing left. His voice cracked. Father wanted me to ask, wanted to know if you could find room, if we could stay here? Mei Lin's heart twisted. You want to stay here? I cannot go back to Wyoming, Chen Zhao said heavily. I have made too many enemies gathering this evidence. Grissom has powerful friends, and when this comes out, they will come after me. I am ruined there. He looked around the cabin, seeing it for the first time, the simple furnishings, the evidence of hard work, and new beginnings. But if you have no room, I understand. I have no right to ask anything of you. Maylin looked at Rhett, a silent question in her eyes. He gave a small nod. "The valley is large enough for 2 families already," she said slowly. "I suppose it's large enough for 3. But you need to understand something, Father. I'm not your property anymore. I'm not anyone's property. I make my own decisions, and Rhett is my partner, my true partner, in everything. If you stay, you accept that. You accept me as I am." "I accept it," Chen Zhao said. "I will work. I will earn my place. And I will try to be the father you deserved, even if it is too late." "It's not too late," June said fiercely. "It can't be too late." Maylin crossed to her father and brother, and after a moment's hesitation, embraced them both. Chen Zhao's arms came around her stiffly, awkwardly, as if he'd forgotten how to hold his daughter. But he held on, and she felt the tremor in his shoulders that might have been tears. "We'll build you a cabin on the western slope," Rhett said quietly, "near the Hayes family. You can help with the farming, maybe start a small herd when we can afford it. It won't be easy, but—" "I am not afraid of work," Chen Zhao said, pulling back from the embrace but keeping one hand on Maylin's shoulder. "I am only afraid of failing my family again." "Then don't," Maylin said simply. "Be better. That's all any of us can do." Billy, who'd been silent through the whole exchange, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I brought your father and June here safe. If you don't need me anymore, I should probably head back and see about finding work." "Stay," Maylin interrupted. "We need good hands, and you're loyal. That counts for more than experience." "Yes, ma'am." Billy's face split in a relieved grin. "I'd like that." The next 3 days were a whirlwind of activity. They sent word to the marshal about the new evidence, requesting his immediate return. They integrated Chen Zhao and June into the valley's operations, finding work that suited their skills. And they prepared for what they knew was coming, the final confrontation with Thomas Grissom. The marshal arrived on the 4th day, his expression grim. "I received your message about new evidence. I need to see it immediately." They spread the documents across the Hayes kitchen table, and the marshal read through them with increasing fury. His face went from neutral to shocked to coldly angry as he absorbed the contents. "This is comprehensive," he said finally. "Testimony from doctors, neighbors, former employees, financial records showing bribery and corruption. If even half of this is true—" "It's all true," Chen Zhao said. "I made sure of it. Every statement is sworn, every record verified." "Then Thomas Grissom is going to hang," the marshal said flatly. "Not just for what he did to his wives, but for the corruption, the bribery, the abuse of power. This goes beyond murder. This is systematic criminal activity." "What about the kidnapping charges against my husband?" Maylin asked. "Dropped, completely dismissed." The marshal looked at her with something approaching apology. "Mrs. Calloway, I'm sorry you had to go through this investigation. It's clear to anyone with eyes that you're here by choice, that your marriage is legitimate, and that Mr. Grissom's charges were nothing but harassment and attempted revenge." Relief flooded through Maylin so powerfully that her knees went weak. Rhett's arm came around her waist, steadying her. "Thank you, Marshal." "Don't thank me yet. I need to go to Wyoming and arrest Grissom, and he's not going to come quietly. He's got money, lawyers, and men on his payroll who'll fight to protect him." The marshal gathered up the documents carefully. "This could get ugly." "Let it get ugly," Rhett said, "as long as it gets done." The marshal left with his evidence, and they waited once again. But this time the waiting felt different, not fearful, but anticipatory. They were no longer the accused, they were the accusers, and justice was finally coming for a man who'd evaded it for far too long. News reached them 2 weeks later by telegram. Thomas Grissom had been arrested on 14 separate charges, including 2 counts of murder, multiple counts of bribery and corruption, and 1 count of conspiracy to falsely imprison. The evidence Chen Zhao had gathered, combined with the marshal's own investigation, had been overwhelming. Grissom's lawyers had tried to fight, but when witnesses started coming forward, emboldened by the official investigation, the case against him became airtight. He was being held without bail awaiting trial. "He'll hang," Webb said with grim satisfaction when they received the news, "or spend the rest of his life in prison. Either way, he's finished." "Good," Maylin said. She felt no joy at Grissom's downfall, just a weary sense of completion. A monster had been stopped. That was enough. With the legal threats resolved and Grissom neutralized, life in the valley settled into a new rhythm. The partnership between the three families, Calloway, Hayes, and Zhao, deepened and strengthened. They helped each other build cabins, shared resources and knowledge, and slowly transformed the raw frontier into something approaching civilization. Chen Zhao proved to be as good as his word. He worked hard, kept his opinions to himself unless asked, and gradually rebuilt his relationship with Mei Lin through actions rather than words. He and Garrett discovered they had much in common, both being farmers at heart, and they began collaborating on crop rotation and irrigation systems. June thrived in the valley, growing stronger and more confident under the mentorship of the Cowboys. Danny and Wyatt took him under their wings, teaching him to rope and ride, and the boy who'd been quiet and fearful in Wyoming transformed into someone who laughed easily and worked without complaint. Catherine became Mei Lin's closest friend, the two women supporting each other through the challenges of frontier life. They traded recipes and remedies, watched each other's children. Catherine had two, and she joked that Mei Lin and Rhett needed to hurry up and add to the valley's population, and created a bond that transcended their different backgrounds. The cabin Rhett had started building was finished by mid-autumn, a solid structure with a stone fireplace, glass windows, and a porch that overlooked the valley. On the day they moved in, carrying their few possessions from the temporary camp to their permanent home, Mei Lin stood in the doorway and felt something profound settle in her chest. This was hers. Truly hers. Not her father's, not Grissom's, not even Rhett's alone. Theirs together, built with their own hands and their own choices. "What are you thinking?" Rhett asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I'm thinking that 6 months ago, I was standing in my father's kitchen watching my future die. And now I'm standing in my own home watching my future begin." She turned in his arms to face him. "I'm thinking that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself, even when the world tells you it's selfish." "It's not selfish to survive," Rhett said. "It's human." "Yes, but surviving isn't enough anymore. I want to thrive. I want to build something that lasts, something that matters." She gestured toward the valley, where smoke rose from the Hayes cabin and her father's new dwelling, where the cattle grazed peacefully and the creek ran clear and cold. "I want this valley to be proof that people can start over, can choose differently, can build something good out of the wreckage of what came before." "Then that's what we'll do." Rhett kissed her forehead gently. Together. That night, they consummated their marriage properly for the first time, not out of obligation or expectation, but out of love and genuine desire. Afterward, lying in their own bed in their own home with the stars visible through the window, Mei Lin felt a completeness she'd never experienced before. She was someone's wife, but she was also her own person. She was part of a community, but she maintained her independence. She had found belonging without losing herself. It was everything she'd never dared hope for. Winter came to the valley with snow and cold winds testing everyone's resolve and resources. But the three families weathered it together, sharing wood and food, taking turns with the difficult work, ensuring no one suffered alone. They held communal dinners in the largest cabin, rotating between families, sharing stories and songs from their different backgrounds. On Christmas Eve, though they didn't call it that, preferring midwinter celebration to avoid religious associations, they gathered around a massive bonfire and exchanged simple gifts. June gave Mei Lin a carving he'd made, a small horse that looked remarkably like the mare she rode. Catherine gave her a quilt pieced together from scraps of everyone's old clothes, creating a visual history of their shared journey. And Rhett gave her a leather-bound journal, its pages empty and waiting for her story. "Write it down," he said. "Everything that happened, everything we built. Someday, people will want to know that it's possible to start over. That courage looks like a Chinese woman choosing freedom over security. That families can be made, not just born." Mei Lin held the journal, feeling the weight of it, the promise. "I will. I'll write it all down." Spring brought new life to the valley. Calves were born, crops were planted, and Catherine Hayes announced she was expecting again. The community they'd built felt more solid now, tested by winter and strengthened by survival. And then, on a warm April morning, a final ghost from the past arrived. A lawyer from Wyoming, representing the territorial court, came with news about the land dispute that had brought the Hayes and Calloway families together in the first place. The court had completed its investigation of Peterson's fraudulent land sales and reached a verdict. The original deed held by Mr. Calloway is legitimate, the lawyer announced. The deed sold to Mr. Hayes was fraudulent. Therefore, legal ownership of the valley belongs to Rhett Calloway. Garrett Hayes went pale. That means you'll need to vacate the property or negotiate new terms with Mr. Calloway, the lawyer said. I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes. I know you've built improvements here, and the court has authorized compensation, but no, Rhett interrupted. We're not doing it that way. Everyone turned to look at him. This valley doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to all of us. We've worked it together, built it together, survived together. I don't want the Hayes family to leave. He looked at Garrett. I want to make our partnership permanent. Equal shares, equal say, equal ownership. We'll divide the valley legally. You take the western section, I take the eastern. We jointly own the middle. That way the court's ruling stands, but so does our agreement. You do that? Garrett's voice was rough with emotion. Even though the law says it's all yours? The law says a lot of things. Doesn't make them right. Rhett extended his hand. What do you say, partner? Want to make this official? Garrett gripped his hand firmly. Yes, absolutely yes. May Lin drew up the legal documents that afternoon, creating a formal partnership that gave each family ownership of their section while establishing shared rights to water, grazing, and future development. The lawyer witnessed and notarized it, shaking his head in amazement. I've never seen anything like this, he admitted. Most folks would take the court ruling and kick the other family out. You're choosing to share when you don't have to. We're choosing to be decent, May Lin corrected. There's a difference between what's legal and what's right. We're choosing right. After the lawyer left, carrying copies of the new partnership agreement, the three families celebrated with a dinner that stretched late into the night. Chen Zhao, who'd been quiet through most of the legal proceedings, stood and raised his glass. I want to say something, he announced. Everyone quieted, turning to listen. When I came here, I was a broken man. Broken by drought, by debt, by my own bad choices. I thought I had lost everything, my ranch, my honor, my daughter. He looked at May Lin, his eyes bright. But my daughter taught me something. She taught me that we are not defined by what we lose, but by what we choose to build from the ruins. That family is not about obedience, but about respect. That strength is not about control, but about letting go. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. May Lin, you are the strongest person I know. You chose freedom when I tried to cage you. You chose love when I tried to sell you. You chose dignity when the world said you had none. And in doing so, you saved not just yourself, but all of us. You built this. He gestured to the gathered families, the valley beyond. This community, this hope, this new beginning. You built it with courage and intelligence and a will that would not break. Father, May Lin's voice caught. I am proud of you, Chen Zhao said firmly. I should have said it years ago, but I say it now. I am proud to be your father, even though I did little to deserve such a daughter. May Lin stood and crossed to him, and they embraced while everyone watched with tears in their eyes. It was reconciliation earned through hard work and harder honesty, and it meant more than any easy forgiveness could have. The months that followed were filled with growth and building. More cabins went up as the cowboys who'd started as hired hands decided to stay and put down roots. Webb brought his wife Sarah out from Kansas, and Danny wrote to a girl he'd been courting back in Texas, asking her to join him. The valley was becoming a real community, a place where people came not just to survive, but to belong. May Lin took on more responsibilities, becoming the valley's unofficial leader in matters of dispute resolution, resource management, and future planning. She started a small school for the children, teaching them reading and arithmetic in the mornings while the adults worked. She began corresponding with women in other territories who were trying to build similar communities, sharing advice and encouragement. And in late autumn, she discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She'd seen her mother die from the complications of childbirth, had nursed enough sick people to know how fragile life could be. But Catherine and the other women rallied around her, sharing their knowledge and their support. You'll be fine, Catherine assured her. You're strong, and you've got an entire valley of people who'll make sure you and the baby survive. Rhett was overjoyed and terrified in equal measure. suddenly paranoid about Mei Lin doing any kind of heavy work. She had to firmly remind him that she was pregnant, not made of glass, and that women had been having babies while working for millennia. "I'll slow down when I need to," she promised. "But I'm not stopping. There's too much to do." The baby was born in early spring, a daughter with her mother's dark eyes and her father's strong lungs. They named her Hope, because that's what she represented, the future they were building. The new generation that would grow up in a valley where people from different worlds worked together, where women had voices, where children learned that courage and kindness mattered more than bloodlines. Chen Zhao held his granddaughter with trembling hands, tears streaming down his weathered face. "She is beautiful," he whispered. "Perfect." "She's half Chinese, half white, and all-American," Mei Lin said, watching her father with the child. "She'll grow up in a world where that doesn't have to be a problem, where she can be all of herself without apology." "Yes," Chen Zhao agreed. "You have built that world for her, and I will help you keep it safe." Word eventually reached them that Thomas Grissom had been convicted and sentenced to life in prison. He would die behind bars, his reputation destroyed, his fortune seized to compensate his victims. It was justice, though it came too late for the two women he'd murdered, and too late to erase the fear he'd caused Mei Lin. But it was something, and sometimes, on the frontier, something was all you could hope for. Years passed. The valley prospered. More families came, drawn by stories of a place where hard work mattered more than heritage, where women had rights, where communities supported each other. The partnership between the Calloway, Hayes, and Zhao families became the model for how the valley operated. Cooperation over competition, shared prosperity over individual gain. Mei Lin's daughter, Hope, grew into a bright, fierce child who learned to read in 3 languages and ride before she could properly walk. June married one of Garrett's daughters, formally joining the families through love as well as partnership. Webb and Sarah had twins. Danny brought his Texas bride to the valley, and Cookie finally admitted he was too old for trail driving and settled in permanently as the valley's cook and unofficial grandfather to everyone's children. On the 10th anniversary of their arrival in the valley, Rhett and Mei Lin stood on the porch of their cabin, expanded now with rooms for their growing family, and looked out over what they'd built. The valley held nearly 50 people now, with more coming every season. There were proper houses, a school building, a community hall, and plans for a church that would welcome all faiths or none. "Do you ever regret it?" Rhett asked, taking her hand. "Leaving Wyoming, marrying a stranger, taking such a wild gamble?" Mei Lin looked at him. This man who'd offered her freedom when he could have demanded obedience, who'd treated her as an equal when the world said she was less, who'd loved her not despite her strength, but because of it. "Not for a single moment," she said. "Every choice I made led me here, to this valley, to this life, to you. How could I regret that?" "I love you," Rhett said simply. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after. You're the bravest person I've ever known." "I'm not brave," Mei Lin corrected, smiling. "I'm just someone who chose to live on my own terms." "That's not bravery. That's survival." "It's both," Rhett said, and it changed everything. Below them, in the valley, they'd transformed from empty frontier into thriving community. The lights of home began to appear as evening settled in. Smoke rose from chimneys, children's laughter carried on the wind, and somewhere someone was playing a fiddle while others sang along. It was ordinary and miraculous at once, the simple magic of people choosing to build something together, to support each other, to create a world where everyone had a place and everyone had worth. Mei Lin thought back to that desperate morning when she'd stood at a crossroads in Wyoming darkness, carrying everything she owned in a carpet bag, choosing between the cage she knew and the freedom she'd never dared imagine. She thought about the girl she'd been, scared, desperate, but determined to choose herself even if it meant losing everything. That girl had become the woman who stood here now, surrounded by family and community, watching her daughter play with the other children, feeling her husband's hand warm in hers, knowing that every hard choice had led her exactly where she was meant to be. She'd been sold for water once, valued only for what she could bring to a transaction. But she'd refused to be bought. She'd claimed her own worth, written her own story, and in doing so, she'd helped build a place where others could do the same. The woman once promised to Thomas Grissom had become Mei Lin Calloway, rancher, leader, mother, wife, and architect of her own destiny. And that was worth more than all the water in Wyoming. As the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, Maylin squeezed Rhett's hand and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new decisions to make. But tonight, she was simply grateful for the life she'd chosen, for the family she'd built, for the freedom she'd fought for and won. She was home. She was loved. She was exactly who she'd always been meant to be. And that was everything.